Yo, Atlas speaking and welcome to part 7 of What If I Was Reborn in Naruto as Rasa of the Sand and brought greatness to the Sand Village. Let the tale begin. Chapter 151, A Two-Pronged Arrangement. A cool breeze swept past a domed building near the Sand Clan's territory. Anoka stood with the three who had just returned from the land of demons, Daikoku, Ishiyu, and Koishir, watching the battle ahead with surprise. This was one of Rasa's contingency plans. Knowing that Iwagakure and Kumogakure's arrival was anything but innocent, how could Rasa not prepare for both possibilities? On the surface, Baki led the Umbu in monitoring the Iwagakure and Kumogakure shinobi. Secretly, however, Anoka was in charge, leading a covert operations unit. Though the number of operatives in the shadows was small, Anoka's sensory abilities surpassed all of Tsunagekyure's Umbu. At Anoka's question, Daikoku answered. That boy is Kunmi, the child of Michikawa-sama. The girl who broke free of the Kumogakure shinobi's Jinjutsu is Sarah, the daughter of Saramu-sama. The other girl is just an ordinary civilian child named Kanna. All three are in the same class this year. Anoka's eyes lit up and her doubts now cleared. So, she was the child of that woman called Saramu? No wonder Anoka sensed Senjutsu chakra within her. She remembered clearly what Rasa had said. The Senjutsu energy of Dragon Oasis originated from the ruins of Roran, where Saramu once lived. Like the priestess of the land of demons, the Queen of Roran was born with the ability to wield the power of the Dragon Vein. Now, that power was Senjutsu energy. That boy, Kunmi, wasn't bad either. For a child, he could barely hold his own against a Kumogakure Jonin. Though barely was the key word. Go assist them. And inform the Sand Clan, letting Kumogakure shinobi set up an ambush near their territory? Their vigilance is far too lacking. The three exchanged glances but moved without hesitation. Kunmi and Sarah's status was anything but ordinary, they could not afford to lose them. Below, Kunmi, manipulating iron sand in his fight against the Kumogakure Jonin, sighed in relief when he saw the Umbu arrive. Immediately, he shielded Sarah and Kanna, retreating and leading the battle to the Umbu. So soon? No choice. For the village. The Kumogakure shinobi grimaced at the sight of Tsunagekyure's Umbu, but they had already prepared to sacrifice themselves. Such was the fate of a shinobi. Tsunagakure, Kumogakure shinobi's lodgings. Tsuchi sat silently in the building. Time passed slowly. At last, a knock came at the door. Enter. A shinobi wearing a Kumogakure forehead protector stepped in, kneeling with a somber expression. Seeing this, Tsuchi already understood. He sighed. Failed? Yes. Tsunagakure also has sensory-type shinobi, and theirs were more skilled than me. Higurashi and the others were exposed as soon as they moved. Though Tsuchi had expected the plan wouldn't go smoothly, such an immediate setback still disappointed him. So, no useful intelligence was gained? Hi! I see. Tsuchi directly took out a scroll and used the summoning technique to summon a lizard. After handing the scroll to the lizard, he spoke to the kneeling shinobi. Since the first plan failed, we have no choice but to proceed with the second step. You will carry it out personally. Hi! Watching the shinobi leave, a cold glint flashed in Tsuchi's eyes. On the desert outskirts of Tsunagakure. Under the cover of night, Iwagakure shinobi, led by their commander, stealthily climbed the cliffs relying on gathered intelligence and finally caught sight of the oasis. This discovery filled them with excitement. Excellent! If we follow this oasis, we're bound to uncover the source of Tsunagakure's green miracle. However, the shinobi leading the mission remained stern-faced despite their enthusiasm. Everyone, proceed with caution. Even if it costs us our lives, we must investigate thoroughly and relay this information back to the village. Hi! Not a single complaint was voiced. Such was the fate of a shinobi, to sacrifice everything for the sake of their village. The team of four immediately advanced along the forest's edge, heading deeper into the desert. As their figures vanished into the distance, two white figures emerged from the sand. So the Iwabikure shinobi have finally set out? Are the spores prepared? Rest assured, this is a matter arranged by Madara-sama himself. Good, good. Though it's a shame. If not for Madara-sama's current weakened state, we could have handled this ourselves. Enough foolish talk. Don't forget, there's someone among them who can sense us. If your carelessness exposes Madara-sama's existence, he will truly kill you. Scary. So scary. Not long after, at Dragon Oasis, Hana, who had been meditating there, suddenly opened her eyes as if sensing something. She turned to Chiyoba, who was studying a set of puppets under lamplight. Chiyoba, I sense 4 powerful chakra signatures rapidly approaching this location. Chiyo's expression turned icy. So they've finally arrived? Since they've come, let's ensure they never leave. A perfect opportunity to test my newest puppets. Glancing at the wall, 9 massive puppets hung in display. Their shapes bore a striking resemblance to the legendary tailed beasts, albeit smaller in size and cruder in craftsmanship. These were Chiyo's latest creations, developed under Rasa's orders by combining the puppet techniques of Rorin with Senjutsu energy. Thus, beneath the seemingly peaceful and lively surface of Sunagakure, the clash of the 3 great shinobi villages had only just begun. 2 hours passed swiftly. After the banquet concluded, Rasa invited the priestess of the Land of Demons to his home as a guest. Michikawa and Saramu did not accompany them since, having already heard about the incident during the banquet, they rushed home to check on their families. Meanwhile, Pakura returned to Dragon Oasis to fight with the upcoming threats. In Rasa's modest household, Moroku, now dressed in casual attire, met his wife, Karura, along with Anoka and his brother-in-law, Yashimaru. Since this was a private gathering, the atmosphere was far more relaxed than the formal banquet. With Anoka, a familiar face, present, Moroku quickly warmed up to Karura, and the 3 women chatted happily. Rasa and Yashimaru stayed briefly before excusing themselves to the balcony outside, leading the women to their conversation. As Rasa's brother-in-law, Yashimaru still felt somewhat nervous around the Kazekage. Fortunately, Rasa took the initiative to ease the tension with casual conversation, allowing Yashimaru to relax. About 10 minutes later, Baki suddenly appeared. His expression was grim, prompting Rasa to frown and ask, "What's happened?" Baki knelt, cold sweat dripping from his forehead. "Kazekage-sama, I beg for your punishment." Chapter 152, A Poisonous Scheme. Over half an hour later, at Sunagakure's Shinobi Hospital, Kazekage Rasa stood in the hallway, flanked by Baki and a group of Umbu operatives. After a while, Yashimaru emerged from the adjacent medical room, dressed in a white coat, wearing a mask and gloves, his expression grave. "Kazekage-sama, both victims died from poisoning. Moreover, the toxin used is a specialized venom unique to Sunagakure's puppet techniques." The moment these words were spoken, Baki broke out in a cold sweat, while the Umbu behind him trembled visibly. "This is not possible, Kazekage-sama. Our Umbu had no involvement in the deaths of those Kumogakure and Iwagakure shinobi." By now, Rasa had already begun piecing together the sinister plot hidden beneath this bizarre incident. His expression remained calm, but his eyes carried a sharp reprimand as he spoke. "Baki, as the head of the Umbu, this level of panic is unbecoming of you." Only then did Baki realize he had indeed overreacted. However, given the catastrophic consequences this incident could trigger, it was hard to remain composed. "Repeat exactly what happened." "Hi!" In short, during the 2-hour banquet welcoming the priestess of the Land of Demons, 2 shinobi, Sami from Kumogakure and Gainen from Iwagakure, suddenly clashed with the Umbu guard stationed at the entrance. Rasa was aware of this. The 2 had been demanding alcohol. Though annoyed, the Umbu had obliged and provided them with drinks. Yet even after drinking, the 2 remained unsatisfied. Staggering drunkenly by the entrance, they hurled insults at Sunagakure while obstructing other shinobi from entering. However, given the diplomatic sensitivity, especially during such a high-profile event, the Umbu had no choice but to endure their behavior. But shortly after the banquet concluded, a sudden scream erupted from the two shinobi's quarters. The nearby Umbu rushed to investigate, only to find both dead, their mouths frothing with black blood, spilled liquor pooling around them. Realizing something was terribly wrong, the Umbu immediately reported to Baki and brought the bodies to the hospital. But it was already too late. Upon receiving the news, Kumogakure's leader, Darui, and Iwagakure's leader, Tsuchi, stormed in, demanding an explanation, threatening war if Sunagakure failed to provide one. After listening to Baki's account, even Yashimaru found this situation suspicious. Rasa, however, had already grasped the gist of the scheme. He turned to Baki and asked, "Baki, as the Umbu commander, what do you think really happened?" Baki wiped the sweat from his brow. He knew that mishandling this could ignite a war, plunging the village into ruin. Kazekage-sama, there is no way this was the Umbu's doing. Though he couldn't claim absolute control over every Umbu operative, human nature was unpredictable, and he had only been in his position for a year. He trusted the men present here implicitly. Then who do you believe is responsible? Baki bowed his head lower, but his mind raced. Now that he had calmed down, the answer became clear. It must be a frame-up. Someone is trying to incite conflict between Sunagakure and the other villages. Rasa's eyes narrowed slightly. Go on. Baki gulped and nodded. The poison used is indeed ours, but that only makes it more suspicious. If we truly wanted them dead, why use something so easily traced back to us? Baki then looked at Rasa and spoke with a sweat on his forehead. This reeks of a third party's interference, likely intending to pit the great villages against each other. A heavy silence fell over the hallway. Then, Rasa spoke, his voice low but decisive. Investigate every shinobi who had access to that toxin. And summon the elders, we have a war to prevent. Baki panicked and wanted to calm his leader. Reporting to the Kazekage-sama. I believe this was done by Iwagakure and Kumogakuure themselves, to frame Sunagakure and justify launching a war against us. Do you have proof? Right now, all the evidence points against us. Do you think anyone would believe what you just said? Baki's expression darkened. This was precisely why he was both furious and humiliated. A scheme so ruthless, sacrificing their own shinobi to frame Sunagakure, was something the Umbu would never conceive of. Even if they had, there was no way to counter such an overt trap. Then how do you plan to handle this? Rasa glanced out the window. Below, at the entrance of Sunagakure's hospital, Kumogakure's Darui and Iwagakure's Tsuchi had already gathered, loudly venting their fury and demanding justice from Sunagakure. The hospital was already crowded, and the presence of these foreign shinobi drew even more attention, not just from Sunagakure's civilians, but also from visitors from other nations. With the festival in full swing and no curfew in place, the village remained lively even at this late hour. Clearly, this too was part of Kumogakure and Iwagakure's plan. As expected. Never underestimate anyone in this world. Compared to Rasa's calm, Baki's mind raced desperately, yet under such an inescapable trap, he could think of no solution. Trembling, he wiped his sweat and stammered. Kazekage-sama. I. Seeing this, Rasa sighed but refrained from criticism. Even he hadn't anticipated such a move from Kumogakure and Iwagakure. Now, under their blatant scheme, Sunagakure stood at a severe disadvantage in the court of public opinion, with no way to prove its innocence. In that case, there's only one solution left. Listen well, Baki. When the facts are entirely against us, there's only one way to escape this predicament: stir the waters until they're too muddy to see through. With that, Rasa gave Baki a meaningful look before walking away. Still sweating, Baki mulled over the Kazekage's words, then suddenly, his eyes lit up in realization. Sunagakure Hospital entrance. Darui and Tsuchi stood in separate corners, their presence drawing a growing crowd. Chatter spread like wildfire, with enthusiastic onlookers eagerly explaining the situation to newcomers. 1 tells 10, 10 tells 100. Of course, These onlookers were spies planted long ago by Kumogakure and Iwagakure. The two leaders exchanged a fleeting glance before looking away. Though brief, that glance conveyed their mutual understanding. Now was the time to join forces. By sacrificing their own shinobi, they had seized absolute initiative in this scheme. Just then, Baki emerged from the hospital with a squad of Umbu. Darui and Tsuchi immediately stepped forward, their expressions icy. Umbu Commander Baki, what of our shinobi? Ignoring their questions, Baki scanned the crowd and asked coldly. Darui-san, Tsuchi-san, could you tell me where the rest of your delegation is? The two froze. Darui, sensing danger, frowned. Commander Baki, that seems irrelevant to the current matter. Humph. Irrelevant? A triumphant smirk spread across Baki's face. Then allow me to inform you where your subordinates are. They're currently in our Umbu interrogation cells. Chapter 153, Chaotic Situation. Rasa's strategy was very effective. When Baki openly stated that Kumogakure and Iwagakure had come under the pretense of negotiations but had secretly spied on Sunagakure during its festival, even attempting to kidnap the young master of the Sand Clan, Kumi, Saramusama's daughter, Sarah, and the commoner girl, Kanna, the anger in the hearts of Sunagakure's people was instantly ignited. Everyone shouted and clamored to drive out these ninjas from Kumogakure and Iwagakure. The accumulated hatred among the 5 great shinobi villages since their establishment was enough for the people of Sunagakure to make a decision with their eyes closed. Moreover, Sunagakure held clear evidence of Kumogakure and Iwagakure attempting to undermine the village. This outcome was somewhat unexpected for Darui and Tsuchi, especially given Sunagakure's strong and dismissive attitude during negotiations. Even now, they had yet to receive an audience with the Kazekage. Was Sunagakure merely bluffing, or did they truly not fear the wrath of Kumogakure and Iwagakure? Neither side knew for sure, but that didn't mean they were doing nothing. In just one night, they reported everything that had happened back to their respective villages. At the same time, they mobilized the spies they had planted within Sunagakure to spread rumors and cause unrest. By dawn, the vast majority of Sunagakure's people were already aware of the previous night's events. Although they stood on the side of their village, their fear of war left them deeply uneasy, especially after learning that their village might soon face an attack not only from Kumogakure and Iwagakure but also from Konoha. At dawn, inside the Kazekage's office. Because of last night's events, Rasa had not gone home to rest. Pakura and Michikawa had originally intended to return as well, but under Rasa's orders, they had remained at the Dragon Oasis to continue their training. Rasa had already sensed the severity of the situation, so he alone would not be enough to handle the possible crisis ahead. He had to ensure that the two of them mastered Senjutsu energy in the shortest time possible. As Rasa sat in deep thought, a knock came from outside. Karura entered, bringing Moroku and Anoka with her. Both Karura and Moroku had evident concern on their faces. Anoka, though maintaining her usual cold demeanor, had a look of quiet concern in her eyes, revealing her inner unrest. Rasa-kun, I brought you breakfast. With the gentle care of a wife, Karura placed the prepared bento on the table. She did not ask about what had happened in the village, she simply did what a wife should do. Rasa still wore his confident smile as he said, "Thank you for your effort." At that moment, Moroku stepped forward and asked, "Rasa-sama, is there anything I can do to help you?" Seeing this, Rasa reassured her. "It seems you've all heard about what happened in the village last night. But don't worry, for now, everything is still under my control." Hearing Rasa say this, Moroku finally let out a sigh of relief. However, remembering what Kamaya had told her the night before, she gathered her courage and said, "Rasa-sama, although I don't like Mizuwa, I think his suggestion makes sense. Therefore, as the Shrine Maiden of the Land of Demons, I request an alliance between Sunagakure and our Land of Demons." At these words, the two people in the room were both taken aback. This time, Rasa did not refuse. Instead, he sincerely expressed his gratitude. "Thank you, Moroku." Seeing that Rasa accepted her goodwill, Moroku smiled happily, but soon her expression turned to disappointment. It's a pity. I have to leave this afternoon. Rasa smiled. It's okay. I'm already working on solving the transportation issue. Once it's resolved, traveling between the land of demons and Sunagakure will be much easier. Then, you can visit me anytime, and I might even go to the land of demons myself. Really? Of course, it's true. Standing nearby, Karura, as Rasa's wife, found it strange to see her husband making a promise with the Shrine Maiden. However, the Shrine Maiden was as innocent as a child, so she didn't overthink it. I will have Saramu coordinate the follow-up matters with you. However, you must also prioritize your safety. Starting this afternoon, I will assign Daikoku, Ishiyu, and Koishiro to guard you closely. All three of them are jonin of Sunagakure. With them by your side, I will feel more at ease. In the afternoon, with a bright smile, Miroku departed from Sunagakure alongside her attendants. In the following days, although Sunagakure outwardly returned to its former peace, the situation in the entire shinobi world began to stir once again. This time, Sunagakure had become the central figure. First, the events that took place in Sunagakure spread throughout the shinobi world. Although both sides had their own versions of the story, any keen observer could see that Iwagakure and Kumogakure had shifted their focus towards Sunagakure. As a result, the war between Iwagakure, Kumogakure, and Konoha came to a complete halt. Konoha, sensing the strange atmosphere, did not take the opportunity to counterattack. Instead, they chose to lie low and recover from their wounds while waiting for the right moment to strike. After all, Konoha and Sunagakure also had deep-seated grudges. Meanwhile, Iwagakure and Kumogakure began working in unspoken agreement to pressure Sunagakure, demanding that they hand over the assassin responsible for killing the shinobi sent to negotiate. Under Rasa's orders, Sunagakure responded to their pressure in the simplest way possible, by adopting a firm stance while stalling for time as long as they could. And so, the days passed. Soon, a week had gone by. Darui and Tsuchi, who had remained in Sunagakure, were no fools. After several rounds of negotiations, they quickly realized that Sunagakure had no intention of handing over the so-called culprit. This made them sense something unusual about Sunagakure's attitude. The village did not seem the least bit afraid of going to war with two major shinobi villages. What frustrated them even more, in this entire week, they still had not met Sunagakure's young Kazekage. It was as if, in the Kazekage's eyes, their plans were utterly insignificant. This left them with an overwhelming sense of helplessness and a growing anger at being treated with such disregard. Fortunately, at that moment, a piece of good news arrived. The daimyo of the Land of Wind had sent an envoy to Sunagakure. Chapter 154, Daimyo's Pressure. Unlike last time, when the daimyo had merely sent his samurai general, Oda, to deliver a letter in secret, this time, the scene was grand and ostentatious. Although the leader of the entourage was still the same samurai, Oda, the sheer scale of the procession upon entering Sunagakure made it clear that the daimyo had a specific agenda, especially at such a critical moment. Sunagakure, Kazekage's office. As the Kazekage, Rasa once again met with the daimyo's trusted aide, Oda. However, this time, there was an additional elderly figure standing beside him. As per protocol, Oda retrieved a handwritten letter from the daimyo. Then, the newly arrived elder immediately spoke in an arrogant tone, questioning Rasa. Kazekage Dano, I am Aoki Yasuno, a close advisor to the daimyo. I have come to Sunagakure under the daimyo's orders. His Excellency wishes to personally ask you, why has Sunagakure sabotaged the alliance with Kumogakure and Iwagakure? Kazekage Dano, do you even understand what you are doing? The moment these words fell, Baki and Saramu, who stood beside Rasa, immediately darkened their expressions. Rasa was their village's Kage, yet this man, Aoki Yasuno, had the audacity to question him in such a tone. However, Rasa acted as though he hadn't heard a word, merely scanning through the daimyo's letter with a thoughtful gaze. He couldn't ignore how perfectly timed the daimyo's envoy had arrived, so perfectly that it didn't feel like a coincidence. Considering that this alliance had originally been proposed by the daimyo himself, it seemed that the daimyo's dissatisfaction with Sunagakure was far greater than Rasa had initially expected. From the way things looked, Sunagakure's past submissiveness to the daimyo had truly made him believe the village was nothing more than his personal retainer to command as he pleased. Seeing that Rasa had remained silent for so long, Aoki Yasuno became even more displeased. "Kazekage Dano, why do you not answer me? Do not forget, I speak to you on behalf of His Excellency the daimyo." Baki's anger was now completely visible, and Saramu stepped forward as if to speak, only for Rasa to raise a hand to stop him. Meanwhile, the samurai, Oda, merely sat there silently, observing. Rasa calmly set the letter aside and turned his gaze toward the elderly man, his expression now cold. "Aoki Yasuno, is it? Let me ask you, on behalf of which daimyo are you speaking to me? The daimyo of the Land of Lightning? Or perhaps the daimyo of the Land of Earth?" Aoki Yasuno's brow furrowed immediately. "Kazekage Dano, are you a fool? Or are you mocking me?" "Humph." Rasa let out a faint snort, further irritating the old man, before he slowly replied. "Whether I am a fool or not, I know myself. But as for some others, I am not so sure." Aoki Yasuno's expression darkened. "Kazekage, what do you mean by that?" "What do I mean? You claim to be a close advisor to the daimyo of the Land of Wind, yet you come here spouting nonsense without even investigating the situation first. Tell me, are all of His Excellency's aides as incompetent as you?" Rasa's unreserved words left Aoki Yasuno trembling with rage, his eyes widening in disbelief. It was as if he had never imagined that the Kazekage would dare to speak to him in such a manner. "Kazekage, how atrocious of you to call me useless and insult His Excellency the daimyo. If you don't give me an explanation, I will report everything that has happened here to the daimyo." "An explanation? As the Kazekage of Sunagakure, why should I explain myself to you? You come here spewing nonsense without even investigating the situation first. That a useless old man like you can still remain by the daimyo's side, how pathetic. You. Aoki Yasuno was so furious that his mustache bristled, his eyes widening in rage. At that moment, Oda, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke. "Kazekage Dano, you've gone too far. Aoki Yasuno is." However, before he could finish, he felt an overwhelming, ominous pressure envelop him. Looking up, he met Rasa's cold, piercing gaze. In that instant, Oda was reminded that the man before him was no ordinary shinobi. He was the Kazekage, one of the most powerful figures in the ninja world. "Too far?" Rasa's voice was like a blade. "Oda-san, tell me, what part of what I said was incorrect? Is this old man not a useless fool? Or do you agree with what he's been saying?" Oda, sensing Rasa's imposing stance, felt a chill in his heart. He now realized that the daimyo's request would not be as simple as he had initially thought. Still, he steadied himself and spoke. "Kazekage Dano, Aoki Yasuno was indeed a bit impatient, but he does have a point. I have heard about what happened between Sunagakure and the shinobi of Kumogakure and Iwagakure. However, in the grand scheme of the three nations alliance, these conflicts can be set aside. After all, the Land of Fire's territory is incredibly fertile. If our three nations join forces, we will surely defeat Konoha and divide the Land of Fire among ourselves." Instead of refuting him, Rasa simply asked, "Oda-san, you keep talking about the alliance of the three great nations, about defeating Konoha and splitting up the Land of Fire. But let me ask you, what makes you think that, after we defeat Konoha, the lands of Lightning and Earth will allow the Land of Wind to take a share of the spoils?" Oda was momentarily stunned, while Aoki Yasuno immediately found an opportunity to jump in. "Of course we have an agreement." "An agreement? So the Land of Wind has already officially allied with the lands of Lightning and Earth?" "Not yet, that's exactly why I'm here, to finalize this matter. If Sunagakure doesn't first ally with Kumogakure and Iwagakure, how can we talk about the larger three nations alliance?" Rasa ignored the foolish old man entirely and instead directed his words toward the slightly more reasonable Oda. Oda-san, do you know how many registered shinobi currently serve Sunagakure? Now understanding where Rasa was going with this, Oda calmed himself and asked. How many? Even with the recent growth in our village's strength and the latest batch of academy graduates, we barely have 4,000 shinobi in total. Do you know how many shinobi Kumogakure and Iwagakure have? Not even counting those they've hidden away, just the number they've sent to the Konoha battlefield alone, Kumogakure has over 10,000, while Iwagakure has 8,000. Both Oda and Aoki Yasuno were visibly shocked. The difference is that large? Oda murmured in disbelief. Aoki Yasuno, on the other hand, snapped back in frustration. Kazekage. Isn't that your fault? What have you been doing with the funds His Excellency allocated to Sunagakure? Why is the village's shinobi force so small? Idiot. Rasa shot the old man a disdainful look before turning back to Oda. Training shinobi takes time. It has only been 8 years since the last great ninja war. Sunagakure suffered heavy losses, and it's impossible to fully replenish our forces in such a short period. Especially in an environment as harsh as ours. Then, Rasa shifted his gaze to Aoki Yasuno. Rather than standing here questioning me, Aoki-san, why don't you go back and persuade the daimyo to allocate more funds to our military? Without waiting for the old man's furious response, Rasa turned back to Oda and continued. Please inform His Excellency the daimyo that, given Sunagakure's current strength, even if our 3 nations join forces, the Land of Wind will not be the one to claim the largest share of the spoils. In fact, we might end up disappearing entirely. Because war means casualties, and Sunagakure cannot afford another war. Chapter 155, Puppets. Although Oda was a samurai, he was not lacking in political wisdom, otherwise, he wouldn't have earned the daimyo's trust. After hearing Rasa's words, he realized that the daimyo had fallen into a trap. The alliance proposal from the daimyos of the Land of Earth and the Land of Lightning was indeed a poison candy. At the same time, from his conversation with Rasa, Oda could tell that while this Kazekage carried an air of arrogance, his words were sincere. He didn't seem to harbor any true disrespect toward the daimyo. As for that arrogance, it was only natural for someone who stood at the pinnacle of shinobi as the leader of Sunagakure. Having obtained the information he needed, Oda had no reason to stay any longer. He had to deliver this intelligence to the daimyo as soon as possible. Watching Oda's group leave, the calm expression Rasa had maintained earlier darkened. Both Baki and Saramu could sense his displeasure. Baki, always perceptive, spoke up. Kazekage-sama, the daimyo is becoming more and more overbearing. Rasa was well aware of this. Technically, as the Kazekage of Sunagakure, he should hold equal standing with the daimyo of the Land of Wind. However, over the years, Sunagakure's dependence on military funding had led to the Kazekage increasingly being treated as little more than a vassal. Of course, he was not satisfied with this status. But for now, he couldn't overturn this unwritten rule. Even though Sunagakure was no longer lacking in military funds, stability remained the top priority in these turbulent times. That didn't mean, however, that Sunagakure would simply do nothing. Baki, there are too many fools surrounding the daimyo. His safety must not be overlooked. Baki immediately understood. Saramu, we need to accelerate our cooperation with the Land of Demons. In times like these, we need some news to stabilize the village's morale. Saramu nodded firmly. She had long since considered herself a part of Sunagakure's future. All right, everyone, get to work. Dragon Oasis. In the heart of the forest, several small residences had been built. Not only had Chio and Ebizo moved in, but Michikawa and Pakura had also set up their own houses. After all, they had been training in Senjutsu energy here almost every day. Not having a proper place to stay was inconvenient. When Rasa arrived, both Pakura and Michikawa came over upon receiving word of his presence. He didn't put too much pressure on them. After briefly discussing some matters, he simply told them to focus on their training. As long as you master Senjutsu energy, we can break the current deadlock in the village. The two of them nodded firmly. They could sense that Rasa was planning something. However, after more than a year of working together, they had built a strong sense of trust in him, so they didn't ask too many questions. Once Michikawa and Pakura left, Rasa walked toward a 3-story building constructed with wood release. This place had been entirely taken over by Chiyo. She had moved all her research equipment, tools, and puppets here from Sunagakure, not just because of the favorable environment, but because it was far safer. When Rasa walked in, he saw Ebizo teaching Hana and Anoka the art of Fuinjutsu. Although Hana specialized in medical ninjutsu, she still needed to master some sealing techniques. After all, when dealing with certain types of chakra, such as tailed beast chakra, Fuinjutsu was often the most effective method. Kazekage-sama. Rasa-sama. Ebizo and Hana both greeted him, while Anoka, true to her usual cold demeanor, remained silent and only bowed slightly in respect. However, instead of greeting him, she got straight to the point. The sealing formula you asked for, my teacher and I have finished preparing it. Oh! Rasa's eyes lit up. Ebizo nodded. Kazekage-sama, please come with me. My sister is waiting for you upstairs. Guided by the three, Rasa arrived on the 2nd floor. This place was Chiyo's puppet workshop. As soon as Rasa stepped inside, he saw 9 puppets hanging on the walls. Chiyo was busy working on them, knocking here and there, but when she noticed Rasa, she looked quite pleased. Come and take a look. These are the puppets you asked this old woman to build. Modeled after the tailed beasts, they incorporate some of the capabilities of the Ryumaika puppet technique. As long as chakra is injected, they can repair themselves automatically. We tested them in real combat a week ago, and they performed excellently. Their power is no less than that of the Chikamatsu collection of 10 puppets. Curious, Rasa walked over. As the Kazekage, he wasn't proficient in puppet techniques, but he understood them well enough. From a technical standpoint, these 9 puppets represented the pinnacle of Sunagakure's puppet craftsmanship. Of course, though they were modeled after the tailed beasts, the resemblance was only in appearance. Their wooden bodies were still quite different from real tailed beasts, especially in terms of size, as they were only about the height of an average person. Still, Rasa was more than satisfied. Chiyo, however, gave him a reluctant look. Kazekage-sama, you're not exactly skilled in puppetry, are you? Leaving such fine puppets with you would be a waste. Why don't you just let this old woman keep them? Rasa hadn't expected Chiyo to be so possessive, but naturally, he wouldn't agree. The reason he had asked her to create these 9 puppets was because he recalled a technique used by Uzumaki Minma in Naruto, Road to Ninja, the 9 masked beasts, where 9 mask-wearing puppets were summoned to battle the Akatsuki. Of course, aside from looking cool, this technique was also highly practical for Rasa. After all, aside from gaining access to the Yellow Springs dimension from Morio, he had also acquired another ability. Forming hand seals, he released 9 streams of Senjutsu chakra from his body. They transformed into insect-like creatures that burrowed into the 9 puppets. In an instant, the wooden puppets became enveloped in Senjutsu energy, their bodies undergoing an elemental transformation. Before long, 9 miniature tailed beasts, seemingly alive yet much smaller in size, appeared before everyone. The sight left the 3 others completely stunned. Only Hana reacted differently, her eyes lit up as she gazed at the tiny tailed beasts. Kawaii! Rasa-sama, can I touch them? Of course. Hana immediately ran over, excitedly petting the small tailed beasts. The creatures responded like living beings, letting out soft cries as she stroked them, which only made her even happier. Wow, so cute! Anokanizan, you should try it too. This was the ability Rasa had obtained from Morio, the puppet insects. It allowed him to shape his Senjutsu energy into parasite-like entities, similar to how Morio had fragmented his own body into insects to break through Rasa's Shikaku form. Any object inhabited by these puppet insects would be completely under their control and could even use the abilities of the original caster. Rasa wasn't greedy, he didn't expect these 9 puppets to become true tailed beasts. But even if they could use just a fraction of the tailed beast's power, that was more than enough. Chapter 156, A Finding. The special ability displayed by Rasa left Chiyo and Ebizo utterly astonished. As a puppeteer, Chiyo immediately stepped forward to inspect the puppets, her face filled with disbelief. She discovered that these puppets, originally pieced together from countless components, had now become a complete, unified entity under Rasa's power. Their exteriors exhibited biological traits, while inside their bodies, a special energy core resembling an insect had formed. This core extended countless thread-like vessels, connecting all the mechanisms within the puppets. This instantly reminded Chiyo of the forbidden puppet art of Sunigakure, human puppets. That technique involved using living human bodies to create puppets. Because as long as the person was alive, their chakra would not dissipate. By modifying a living body and transforming it into a puppet, the chakra within would remain intact. Combined with the body's natural chakra circulatory system, such a human puppet could even wield the deceased's original ninjutsu, including bloodline limit. However, modifying a living person's body was an undeniably cruel practice. Even a shinobi village like Sunigakure had classified such a bloody puppet technique as forbidden. Yet now, Rasa, the Kazekage, had managed to transform ordinary puppets into human puppets. This ability was nothing short of miraculous. How did you do this? Is this also a power of Senjutsu chakra? Chiyo asked in shock. Rasa initially wanted to deny it. After all, this was a power he had obtained through the karma ability derived from the Moryo. But considering that Moryo's chakra had now merged with Senjutsu energy, he thought for a moment before replying. You could say so. However, compared to other Senjutsu abilities, I can't guarantee that you'll be able to attain this power. It's like the difference between regular ninjutsu and bloodline limit in chakra. I call this ability, Senjutsu Boundary, Puppet Insects. Right now, you haven't even mastered basic Senjutsu, so discussing a Senjutsu boundary is out of the question. Beside them, Ebizo nodded in agreement. He's right, sis. Don't rush things, focus on mastering Senjutsu chakra first. But Chiyo paid no attention. She pulled out a scroll from her pocket and immediately summoned her secret technique, Dance of the Sakura, 10 puppets of Chikamatsu. Without hesitation, she addressed Rasa directly. Kazekage-sama, use this power on my 10 puppets of Chikamatsu as well. Rasa didn't refuse but instead warned. It's not difficult, but Chiyo-sama, I must make this clear, puppets controlled by my Senjutsu boundary, puppet insects will fall under my command. Moreover, unless you master this ability yourself, you won't be able to replenish the Senjutsu chakra within the puppet insects. Chiyo waved off his concerns without a second thought. No problem. Compared to being controlled, this old woman is far more interested in the ability itself. Seeing her determination, Rasa proceeded to apply Senjutsu boundary, puppet insects to the 10 puppets of Chikamatsu. Once the transformation was complete, Chiyo immediately dismissed her guests, fully immersing herself in studying the changes to her 10 puppets of Chikamatsu. Watching this, Ebizo could only shake his head helplessly. Kazekage-sama, since my sister's matter has been settled, please follow me. H.in. After storing the 9-tailed beast puppets within the room, Rasa followed Ebizo, Onoka, and Hana to the 3rd floor. The area was divided in half, one side belonged to Ebizo, the other to Chiyo. As soon as Rasa stepped into Ebizo's section, his eyes were met with countless sealing formula scrolls covering the walls and floor. On Ebizo's desk, a palm-sized scroll stood upright. Ebizo approached, picked it up, and presented it to Rasa with both hands. Kazekage-sama, this is the technique developed according to your request. I've named it, Gourd Seal. The odd name left Rasa momentarily confused. He took the scroll, unrolled it, and immediately understood Ebizo's reasoning. Unfortunately, Kazekage-sama, your initial request, to directly seal a special space inside your body, was beyond my capabilities. However, Onoka here provided me with inspiration. If we couldn't seal the space into you directly, we had to compromise. Think of it like a gourd. We create an independent space as the upper half, the secondary space, and seal it within you. Then, we treat the original special space as the lower half, the primary space, using space-time ninjutsu to establish a bridge between the two. That is the principle of the gourd seal. He then pointed at the young girl with red hair. The entire development process owes much to Onoka. Without her Uzumaki clan sealing techniques as reference, I would never have succeeded. After briefly reviewing the gourd seal's design, Rasa nodded in approval. You've both worked hard. It was our duty. You've done so much for the village, this old man could only contribute this much. Ebizo remained composed, but Onoka suddenly spoke up, her gaze fixed on Rasa. No need for thanks. Completing this technique was only possible because of the space-time formulas you provided. But if you truly want to show gratitude, there's something I'd like as a reward. Though you might hesitate to part with it. Hana tugged at Onoka's sleeve nervously, worried for her sister who might anger the leader of the village. Rasa, intrigued, asked, "What is it?" Onoka glanced at Hana, her eyes softening briefly, then replied, "I'd prefer to discuss it with you alone." Rasa raised an eyebrow but nodded, shifting the topic instead. "Has the gourd seal been tested?" Ebizo answered this time. "Rest assured, Kazekage-sama. Human experimentation required preparation, but those Iwanin practically delivered themselves to us." "I see. Was it successful?" "Indeed. Please follow me." Under Ebizo's guidance, the group entered Chiyo's laboratory. In one of the rooms, four unconscious Iwagakure shinobi lay strapped to examination tables, their eyes covered and their chests exposed, each bearing intricate sealing formulas. My sister sedated them. "Kazekage-sama, you may inspect the seals yourself." Rasa approached, pressing his hand against one of the test subject's chests. As he channeled Senjutsu chakra into the seal, his senses expanded into a vast, empty space, roughly the size of a football field. At its center lay an octagonal pattern. When infused with Senjutsu chakra, the pattern would activate, allowing the energy from Dragon's Oasis to flood in. Chapter 157, Onoka's Demand. Excellent! It was rare for Rasa to display his emotions so openly, but this time he couldn't contain his satisfaction. The effects of this newly developed sealing technique had genuinely exceeded his expectations. With the successful creation of this technique, Rasa finally possessed a means to potentially stand against even the legendary Sage of Six Paths in the future. This was something that even his extraordinary ability, the Karma Mark, couldn't guarantee, a true sense of security. Currently, Rasa's power derived from the fusion of the Dragon Vein's energy and Morio's chakra, transformed into a unique form of Senjutsu chakra. However, when compared to the vast natural energy reserves of the three great sage regions or the overwhelming chakra of the Ten Tails, his current energy reserves remained relatively insignificant in terms of sheer volume. While the special properties of his Senjutsu chakra allowed him to amplify his combat effectiveness far beyond what his raw energy levels would suggest, the fundamental issue of quantity remained. The combined energy from both the Dragon Vein and Morio amounted to roughly the equivalent of two-tailed beasts at most. But the potential enemies he might face? The three great sage regions were concerning enough. Then there was Otsutsuki Kagaya, who represented the combined power of all nine-tailed beasts plus the entire world's chakra. And her son, Otsutsuki Hagoromo, the Sage of Six Paths, had managed to seal even her away. This alone spoke volumes about the terrifying upper limits of power in this world. After 1,000 years of development, the Sage of Six Paths had undoubtedly grown to unimaginable heights of power. The yin-yang power he casually bestowed upon Naruto and Sasuke had been sufficient to effortlessly reseal Kagaya. Yet he claimed to be nothing more than residual chakra lingering after death? That was clearly nonsense. Not to mention the still unseen Otsutsuki clan members and the so-called Otsutsuki god. This was precisely why Rasa still didn't dare make any moves against the tailed beasts. He wasn't like Madara Uchiha, who was the reincarnation of the sage's own son Indra. If Rasa were to directly target the tailed beasts, he had no doubt that the Sage of Six Paths would personally emerge from the Pure Land to deal with him. He might be being overly cautious, but in a time when 3 ninja villages were eyeing to get a piece of Sunagakure, he didn't want to take his chances. In terms of quality, while the freedom afforded by Senjutsu Chakra was indeed powerful, it had one critical flaw: it didn't significantly enhance Rasa's physical body. To put it simply, as Rasa had once observed, shinobi in this world were essentially glass cannons. They possessed tremendous offensive capabilities, thanks to the nature of chakra, but had pathetically weak defenses, because chakra actually drained the body rather than strengthening it. While his Senjutsu Chakra removed the harmful strain on the body that normal chakra caused, it still didn't provide any substantial improvement to physical durability. But this newly developed seal changed everything. With it, Rasa could now begin training in Ryuchi Cave's most secret art, the dragon transformation technique. And the fundamental principle of this technique? Evolution. Though Rasa was eager to begin his training immediately, there was still one more matter that needed to be addressed. Ebizo, ever perceptive, tactfully excused himself and left with Hana, leaving only Rasa and Anoka alone in the room. "Now that we're alone, you can tell me. What reward do you want?" Rasa asked directly. Anoka's answer genuinely surprised him. "From what Hana has told me about Chiyo-sama's research, is it true? About the connection between the Uchiha, Senju, and Uzumaki clans?" Rasa's eyebrow twitched slightly. He wasn't particularly shocked that she knew about this, but he already had a strong suspicion about what she was leading toward. What exactly are you implying?" As Rasa had anticipated, Anoka spoke with complete directness. "I want the Mangekyo Sharingan that Chiyo-sama currently possesses, and I want it transplanted into me." The room fell into complete silence. Rasa carefully studied Anoka's expression. Her delicate features were set in absolute determination. After a long pause, he responded in an uncharacteristically soft tone. "Would you tell me your reasons?" Anoka lowered her gaze, her eyes clouded with memory. "On the day the Uzumaki clan was destroyed, I learned one fundamental truth: to survive in this shinobi world, you can never place your hopes for survival in the hands of others. Just as the Uzumaki clan once foolishly relied on Konoha. I only want to depend on my own power to protect both myself and Hana." Rasa felt a flicker of surprise. The contrast between the sisters was striking. Where Hana still retained a childlike innocence, her older sister had clearly matured far beyond her years. "Very well. You may have that Mangekyo Sharingan. In fact, I'll give you 2. A pair is necessary to wield its full potential. I'll discuss this matter with Chiyo-sama personally, but for your own safety, the transplantation will only proceed after she has thoroughly confirmed your body's compatibility." A rare, genuine smile touched Anoka's lips at Rasa's evident concern for her well-being. "Thank you." Rasa simply shook his head. "There's no need for thanks. In many ways, this actually benefits Sunagakure as well. If you can truly master the Sharingan's power, our village will gain another truly elite shinobi capable of standing on the front lines." Anoka didn't bother denying this point. Though she had framed her desire for the Sharingan as being purely for personal protection, both of them knew the truth: their fates were now completely bound to Sunagakure, and to Rasa himself. After a thoughtful pause, Anoka raised her eyes to meet Rasa's gaze directly. "We still have some time before the procedures begin. If you have no objections, Kazekage-sama, allow me to personally instruct you in the intricacies of the gourd seal. The name may sound peculiar, but from a technical perspective, it's an extremely complex sealing formula." Rasa saw no reason to refuse such an offer. And so, under Anoka's careful tutelage, Rasa began the process of mastering the gourd seal technique. Sunagakure. Kumogakure Shinobi Lodgings. Darui let out a heavy sigh as he finished reviewing the latest intelligence reports gathered from throughout the village. Calling his sole remaining subordinate to his side, he announced in a grave tone. "Prepare for our return. Our mission here is complete." "Complete? What do you mean, Darui-sama?" the subordinate asked in confusion. Darui saw no reason to conceal the truth. This Kazekage's political acumen is extraordinary. He's even managed to bring the Wind Daimyo firmly to his side, rendering all our pressure tactics completely ineffective. The Reikage has made his decision. Kumogakure will join forces with Iwagakure to launch a full-scale assault on Sunagakure. I understand. I'll make the necessary preparations immediately. Good. As his subordinate hurried away, Darui turned his gaze toward the distant silhouette of the Kazekage's tower, his expression unreadable. In the 2 weeks since their arrival, he had never once managed to secure an audience with the young Kazekage. This deliberate avoidance only served to deepen the air of mystery surrounding the man. With political maneuvers that belied his youth, Rasa had systematically dismantled every scheme that Kumo and IWA had thrown at him. But now, facing the combined military might of both Kumogakure and Iwagakure, with Konoha potentially joining the fray as well, how would the young Kazekage respond? Meanwhile, in an almost perfectly synchronized movement, Iwagakure's delegation also began making preparations to depart Sunagakure. This coordinated exodus sent a clear and ominous signal to Baki, the commander of Suna's ANBU forces. The atmosphere was thick with the unmistakable tension of impending war. He immediately mobilized his ANBU operatives, dispatching them throughout the village and beyond to gather intelligence. The reports that came back confirmed his worst suspicions. Both Kumogakure and Iwagakure, who had previously appeared to be standing down, were now actively mobilizing their resources and forces. All signs pointed toward preparations for full-scale military engagement. But this time, their target wasn't Konoha. This time, their sights were set squarely on Sunagakure. Chapter 158, Kirigakure enters the stage. Although Kumogakure and Iwagakure had gone to great lengths to conceal their military preparations, the mobilization of such massive quantities of supplies and shinobi simply couldn't be hidden from the various intelligence networks embedded within their villages. However, this very transparency served to underscore the seriousness of their intentions. This wasn't like 6 months ago when they had merely been posturing to pressure Sunagakure into joining their campaign against Konoha. This time, both villages were clearly preparing for all-out war. Land of Fire, Konohagakure. When reports of Kumo and Iwa's movements reached the Hidden Leaf, the initial wave of relief among Konoha's shinobi quickly gave way to barely contained excitement. The shifting strategic focus of these two major villages meant that Konoha had finally weathered its most dangerous period. If Kumogakure and Iwagakure truly turned their full military might against Sunagakure, it would free Konoha from the threat of multi-front warfare that had been hanging over them like a sword. Yet within the village leadership, a sharp divide emerged regarding how to respond to this development. One faction, driven by raw emotion and the thirst for vengeance, argued vehemently for joining the assault on Sunagakure. The memories of Suna's surprise attack on the Land of Fire territory, which had not only caused significant damage but also brought tremendous political pressure from the daimyo, still burned fresh. Combined with the humiliating defeat in the Land of Rivers, where over 1,000 Konoha shinobi had lost their lives, the desire for retribution ran deep through the ranks. The opposing camp, guided by cold strategic calculation, advocated for using this opportunity to rebuild Konoha's strength. Their position was simple: let Kumo and Iwa bleed themselves dry against Suna's defenses, then assess the situation once both sides had weakened each other sufficiently. While both approaches ultimately leaned toward aggression, they represented fundamentally different mindsets, one driven by passionate emotion, the other by dispassionate logic. From a purely tactical standpoint, remaining on the sidelines was undoubtedly the wiser choice. Yet Sunagakure's repeated provocations had left Konoha's shinobi seething with barely contained rage, and suppressing that collective anger would require tremendous political will. Fortunately for the more cautious faction, their position was strengthened by one crucial factor: Konoha's military commander and strongest weapon, Namikaze Minato, remained deep in training at Mount Maiboku, mastering the ways of Senjutsu. Without their yellow flash present, any aggressive moves would be significantly riskier. Land of Wind, Sunagakure. A full week had passed since the abrupt departure of Iwagakure and Kumogakure's diplomatic delegations. On the surface, Sunagakure appeared to have returned to its previous state of rapid development and reconstruction. The streets were bustling with activity, construction projects continued unabated, and the markets thrived. Yet beneath this facade of normalcy, an undercurrent of tension pulsed through the village. Despite the ANBU's best efforts to control information flow and maintain morale, news of the impending storm had inevitably seeped into the collective consciousness. Dragon's Oasis. At the very heart of the vast, artificially created forest, beneath the towering form of the divine tree that served as the nexus of natural energy, Rasa sat in deep meditation. Two figures stood watch over his practice, the venerable monk Bunpuku, current Jinchuriki of the One-Tailed Shikaku, and the serpentine sage Tajutsuheim from Ryochi Cave. Bunpuku maintained his characteristic air of tranquil detachment, his aged face the picture of serenity as he observed the proceedings with the calm demeanor of one who had long since made peace with the world. Tajutsuheim, by contrast, watched with barely concealed astonishment, her slitted eyes widening periodically as she bore witness to the unprecedented chakra manipulation unfolding before her. Rasa sat bare-chested, his torso exposed to reveal an intricate seal emblazoned over his navel, a complex spiral-patterned fuinjutsu array surrounding a central trigram formation. The surrounding atmosphere crackled with energy as visible streams of emerald-green senjutsu chakra swirled violently through the air, being drawn inexorably toward the vortex-like seal before being compressed and absorbed into the trigram's core. Within the sealed alternate dimension, a space roughly equivalent to a football field in size, the influx of energy created a surreal spectacle. The entire space had become saturated with dense, mist-like senjutsu chakra that swirled and eddied like water filling a vast pool. Yet this energy was anything but placid. Guided by some unseen force, the chakra moved in deliberate, spiraling patterns, all currents converging at the dimensional space's exact center. There, through unimaginable compression, the energy had formed into a fist-sized sphere of pure power, a Rasengan formed not from ordinary chakra, but from the most refined senjutsu energy. This was the essence of Ryochi Cave's most guarded secret, the dragon transformation technique. The principle was deceptively simple yet incredibly profound. Through continuous compression and refinement of natural energy, or in this case, senjutsu chakra, the accumulated power would eventually reach a critical threshold where quantity transformed into quality. Once this metamorphosis occurred, the refined energy would then rebound into the user's physical form, catalyzing a corresponding evolution at the cellular level. It was this very technique that explained the monstrous size, unnatural longevity, and terrifying power of Ryochi Cave's serpentine inhabitants. Even in its unrefined state, simply having access to such vast reserves meant Rasa no longer needed to worry about exhausting his senjutsu chakra reserves in battle. With this foundation established, he had finally gained the right to participate in the highest levels of this world's power struggles. Now, all that remained was to wait for the opportune moment to strike. Yet before that moment arrived, Baki returned from his intelligence-gathering operations with a development that even Rasa hadn't anticipated. A delegation from Kirigakure had arrived at Sunagakure's gates. Sunagakure, Kazekage's office. When Rasa returned from his training session and entered his office, he found an unexpected group of visitors awaiting his audience. The delegation consisted of 5 figures, each more distinctive than the last. At their forefront stood a youthful-looking boy with striking green hair, a unique flower petal-shaped weapon strapped to his back. Beside him stood a familiar face, the hulking form of Kisame Hashigaki, leader of Kirigakure's infamous 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist. Behind this pair stood a man with unkempt gray-blue hair, his right eye concealed beneath a leather eye patch, with what appeared to be sealing talismans dangling from both ears. The remaining 2 members of the delegation seemed comparatively ordinary, their appearances failing to register any particular recognition from Rasa. The green-haired youth stepped forward and executed a perfect formal bow. "I am Yagura, Jonin of Kirigakure. It is an honor to make your acquaintance, Kazekage-sama." Rasa's eyes narrowed slightly in recognition. So this is the boy who will become the 4th Kazekage, and later, the Jinchuriki of the Three Tails. Returning the greeting with a slight nod, Rasa studied the group with calculated interest. "To what do we owe the pleasure of this visit from Kirigakure? Don't tell me you've come simply to offer congratulations on my ascension to Kage again." Kisame's shark-like grin widened, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. You flatter us with your humor, Kazekage-sama. This time, Yagura-sama and I come bearing an official gift from the Mizukage himself, a token of our village's goodwill. Goodwill? Rasa's tone remained carefully neutral. Indeed. Kisame confirmed, producing a sealed scroll from within his robes. Baki stepped forward to accept the document, performing a quick security check before passing it to Rasa. Breaking the seal, Rasa's eyebrows rose slightly as he scanned the contents. Your Mizukage proposes a formal alliance between our villages? Surely you're aware that Kumogakure and Iwagakure are currently mobilizing for war against Sunagakure? It was Yagura who answered, his voice soft yet carrying an undercurrent of steel. Precisely why our offer carries such weight, would you not agree? In times of crisis, true intentions are revealed. This is Kirigakure's genuine sincerity, Kazekage-sama. Rasa's lips quirked in the barest hint of a smile. Then perhaps you'd care to elaborate on how exactly Kirigakure envisions supporting Sunagakure in this alliance? Yagura didn't hesitate. The Mizukage is prepared to deploy a contingent of our finest shinobi to serve as auxiliary forces alongside Sunagakure's troops. These would operate as elite mercenary units specializing in countering Iwagakure and Kumogakure's tactical advantages. Generous terms indeed. Rasa mused. But such generosity surely comes with expectations beyond simple camaraderie between villages? Yagura conceded with a polite nod. Naturally. Beyond standard operational compensation, the Mizukage hopes to establish deeper collaborative ties between our villages. Specifically regarding certain unique assets Sunagakure has acquired, the first Hokage's cellular research, Sharingan specimens, and the complete Uzumaki clan sealing techniques you obtained from Konoha. Chapter 159, Fishing in Troubled Waters. Although Rasa had anticipated that the arrival of these Kirigakure shinobi wouldn't be for simple purposes, their outrageous demands still struck him as utterly laughable. Your Mizukage certainly has quite the appetite. As he spoke, a sudden realization flashed through Rasa's mind. Now I understand. So, when Kirigakure destroyed Uzushigakure back then, you actually failed to obtain the Uzumaki clan sealing techniques after all? No wonder your land of water still hasn't been able to produce proper Jinchuriki to this day, despite having acquired both the Three Tails and Six Tails back then. The expressions of all 5 Kirigakure representatives immediately darkened. Yagura forced himself to regain composure before responding. Whether the appetite is large or not depends on mutual benefit. Exchanging the Uzumaki sealing techniques for a reliable ally, isn't this the most advantageous choice for Sunagakure in its current situation? You're quite the silver-tongued brat. Rasa let out a light chuckle, completely ignoring Yagura's displeased expression as he continued his questioning. Then let me ask this, if I were to agree to this cooperation, who would hold command authority over Kirigakure's shinobi forces? The question momentarily caught Yagura off guard, but he quickly recovered. The command of Kirigakure's shinobi naturally remains with Kirigakure. However, Kazekage-sama can rest assured that as mercenaries, completing our employer's missions would absolutely be our top priority. Oh? So you expect me to trade the precious Uzumaki sealing techniques in exchange for a group of Kirigakure shinobi who won't even obey my direct commands? Tell me, is it your Kirigakure that has misunderstood the nature of warfare, or is it me? Meanwhile, Kirigakure would gain the means to create 2 powerful Jinchuriki with these techniques. Is your Mizukage taking me for some kind of fool? The Kirigakure delegation's expressions shifted dramatically once again. Yagura had no choice but to step forward and argue. But this arrangement would still alleviate Sunagakure's current predicament, would it not? Kazekage-sama, Kumogakure and Iwagakure won't give Sunagakure any breathing room, and Konoha will soon follow suit. Sunagakure's situation has reached a critical juncture. Therefore, forming an alliance with us is your best possible option. His words seemed to steady the Kirigakure representative somewhat. Unfortunately, Rasa merely responded with a faint smile. So what you're saying is that Kirigakure intends to take advantage of our desperate situation to extort us? Without giving the Kirigakure delegation any further opportunity to speak, Rasa directly addressed Baki. "See them out, Baki. Yagura, you can go back and tell your Mizukichi to return for negotiations when he's thinking more clearly." With that, he stood up and prepared to leave. "Kazekage-sama." Yagura attempted to continue speaking, but Baki stepped forward with clear displeasure on his face, extending his arm to block their path. "Please take your leave now. Don't waste the Kazekage's valuable time any further." Yagura's brow furrowed tightly, but in the end he had no choice but to lead his group away. On the rooftop of the Kazekage building, Rasa watched the departing Kirigakure delegation with undisguised contempt on his face. To the entire shinobi world, the weakened Sunigakure facing the combined assault of a Wagakure and Kumogakure must appear like fresh meat on a butcher's block, ripe for the taking by any opportunistic village. Yet what these short-sighted fools fail to comprehend is that within every crisis lies hidden opportunity. Should Sunigakure successfully weather this storm and emerge victorious against the combined might of two great villages, we would instantly surpass Kirigakure in standing, overtake both Iwagakure and Kumogakure in military prestige, and position ourselves as equals to Kanahagakure itself. As that ancient military treatise states, a single decisive victory prevents countless future battles. Before long, Baki returned from escorting their unwanted guests, approaching to murmur respectfully, "Kazekage-sama, the Kirigakure delegation has been properly seen beyond our borders." Rasa acknowledged with a slight nod, his sharp gaze turning contemplative. These Kirigakure snakes never miss an opportunity to fish in troubled waters, though their shameless attempt has inadvertently reminded me of something important. Turning to his subordinate, Rasa issued crisp new orders. Since the first Hokage distributed the 3 tails and 6 tails to Kirigakure, they've shockingly failed to produce stable Jinchuriki. I want our intelligence network to locate where those 2-tailed beasts are currently contained. Baki stiffened visibly. Even amidst crisis, the Kazekage's strategic vision remained focused on acquisition. "Understood. I'll dispatch our best operatives immediately." After a measured pause, Baki carefully voiced his concerns. "Kazekage-sama, shouldn't we prioritize defensive preparations? IWA and Kumo's military mobilization suggest imminent invasion." Indeed, for over a week since detecting enemy movements, Rasa had only issued basic precautionary warnings, no fortifications, no countermeasures beyond cautionary alerts to field operatives. Rasa's gaze turned toward distant Dragon's Oasis as he posed a tactical question. "Baki, what odds would you assign Sunigakure surviving conventional war against 2 great villages?" Baki's features darkened before mustering conviction. "Our average shinobi may be weaker, but with your power, Pakura-sama and Michikawa-sama matching their elites, plus our Senjutsu chakra, we can endure like Konoha did." "Endure like Konoha?" Rasa's voice turned icy. "Konoha sent children to die by war's end. Is that Suna's future?" Seeing Baki's conflicted expression, Rasa revealed his strategy. "Suna cannot absorb second war-level losses. Our smaller population makes attrition warfare untenable. Therefore," his voice dropped to a steely whisper, "we won't follow Konoha's playbook. We'll end this with one surgical strike." "A single strike?" Baki's eyes widened. "Like the Fire Country operation? But they'll have prepared countermeasures." Rasa's lips curled dangerously. "This time, only 3 operatives, myself, Pakura and Michikawa. A leadership decapitation strike." Before Baki could protest, Rasa continued. "Minimal monitoring on Kumo, just for appearances. Full intelligence focus on IWA. Track Inoki's every movement. That fossil only understands pain, so my plan is to make IWA bleed enough and his self-preservation will force withdrawal. Break one, and their alliance crumbles." Seeing dawning comprehension, Rasa concluded. "One final move. Recall that Akatsuki organization? Rather than scheming with Kirigakure, why not employ mercenaries we can actually control?" Chapter 160, Cooperation with Akatsuki. Amigakure. Amidst the relentless downpour, two shinobi clad in black cloaks adorned with red clouds dashed swiftly across the waterlogged ground. After nearly half an hour, they arrived at a concealed cave nestled within a mountain valley. The flickering light of a blazing campfire inside finally revealed their figures. At the forefront stood Nagato, the current leader of the Akatsuki organization, his crimson hair damp from the rain. Beside him was Konan, her expression equally weary. Lately, life had not been easy for Akatsuki. Although the war between Konohagakure, Iwagakure, and Kumogakure had temporarily ceased, that didn't mean the shinobi of these villages had stopped moving. With rumors that Iwagakure and Kumogakure were preparing to attack Sunagakure, both villages had begun mobilizing their forces once again. War consumed not only military funds but also vast amounts of resources, far more than what the daimyo's allocations and the village's reserves could sustain. As a result, plundering the wealth of civilians in smaller nations and occupied territories had become a common tactic among these shinobi. This wasn't exclusive to Iwagakure and Kumogakure, even Konoha frequently engaged in such acts. And this was precisely why Akatsuki exists, to protect the minor nations caught in the crossfire of the great village's conflicts. Because of this, Akatsuki had recently clashed repeatedly with Iwagakure, Kumogakure, and even Konoha. With only around 1,000 shinobi in their ranks, protecting so many small nations was an overwhelming task. Yet, Nagato did his utmost to deploy Akatsuki's forces wherever they were needed. Their efforts had earned Akatsuki considerable fame across the shinobi world. However, earlier today, Konan, who handled intelligence operations, had urgently contacted them through a secret technique, summoning them back to the village for a critical decision. "Konan, what's so important that you needed both me and Nagato to return?" Konan's expression was grave as her gaze shifted toward the depths of the cave. To Nagato and Yahiko's surprise, a masked ANBU operative emerged from the shadows. "I am a shinobi of Sunagakure's ANBU. Codename, White Thorn. I come under the orders of the Kazekage-sama to meet with the leader of Akatsuki." "Sunagakure, the Kazekage?" Both Nagato and Yahiko were stunned. It had been nearly half a year since their last encounter with the Kazekage of Sunagakure. Neither of them had expected the Kazekage to seek them out personally this time. Though their previous meeting with the young Kazekage, only slightly older than them, had left a positive impression, all three present knew this sudden visit couldn't be for something trivial. Yahiko steadied himself, adopting the composed demeanor befitting a leader. "So, what business does Sunagakure have with us?" The ANBU operative didn't answer immediately. Instead, he retrieved a scroll from his pouch and presented it with both hands. Nagato stepped forward, took the scroll, and passed it to Yahiko. Only then did the ANBU speak again. "My mission is complete. I shall take my leave." With that, the shinobi vanished into the raging storm outside. Watching the Sunagakure shinobi depart, the three of them exchanged bewildered glances. After a moment of silence, Konan turned to Yahiko and spoke. "Shouldn't we first see what the Kazekage-sama wrote in that letter?" "Right." Yahiko unfurled the scroll, but his brows furrowed almost immediately. "What's wrong?" Handing the scroll to Konan and Nagato, Yahiko hesitated before speaking. "The Kazekage of Sunagakure wants to hire Akatsuki to fight against Iwagakure and Kumogakure's shinobi?" Nagato, who hadn't yet read the contents, stiffened in shock. Meanwhile, Konan's expression darkened as she scanned the scroll, now understanding Yahiko's hesitation. In principle, Akatsuki's stance was to avoid direct involvement in the conflicts of the great nations. But the Kazekage's letter dangled an offer that was difficult to refuse: official recognition of Akatsuki's existence by Sunagakure, along with multiple cooperative agreements between them. Having struggled alone in Amagakure for so long, the three of them knew exactly how tempting this bait was. On the surface, Akatsuki appeared to be thriving. Its numbers had swelled to over 1,000 shinobi, surpassing even some minor hidden villages. But as its leaders, they were painfully aware of the organization's precarious position. First, Akatsuki was an illegal entity in Amagakure. The only recognized shinobi force in the Land of Rain was Hanzo of the Salamander's Amagakure. This created an unavoidable problem: funding. Without the Land of Rain support, Akatsuki lacked stable financial backing. In truth, the organization ran purely on the shared convictions of its members. Most of its shinobi survived through self-sufficiency. Moreover, Akatsuki's ideals ensured that none of the 5 great shinobi villages, the true rulers of the ninja world, would ever accept them. This forced Akatsuki to operate in the shadows, surviving in the margins between the great nations. Had this been the Akatsuki led by Pain, Nagato's post-Yahiko persona, such concerns might not have mattered. But Yahiko, who still dreamed of achieving peace through understanding, yearned for Akatsuki to gain broader recognition and legitimacy. Yet, this offer, while alluring, was also poisoned honey. Accepting it would shatter the unspoken balance between Akatsuki and Amagekyu's official forces. A single nation could never tolerate 2 rival shinobi organizations. Worse, it would provoke the wrath of Iwagakure and Kumogakure. Conan, understanding the dilemma, spoke softly. "Yahiko, whatever you decide, we'll stand with you." Nagato, still reading the scroll, nodded in agreement. Yahiko massaged his temples. Maybe I'm just not cut out to lead. He recognized the benefits of aligning with Sunagakure, but one misstep could shatter Akatsuki's unity. After all, as one of the 5 great villages, Sunagakure itself had inflicted suffering on neighboring minor nations. Many within Akatsuki harbored deep resentment toward them. Yet one thing was clear. Akatsuki doesn't belong to me alone, it belongs to all of us. I'll seek everyone's opinion before deciding. As leader, Yahiko swiftly gathered Akatsuki's high-ranking members. He had expected fierce debate, but to his surprise, when he revealed Sunagakure's proposal, most agreed without hesitation. Some even began discussing what demands they should make in return. Only a handful voiced opposition. Yahiko found the reaction unsettling. Did I overcomplicate this? Or have I failed to truly understand my comrades all along? Chapter 161, Sage Art Training. Mount Myaboku. Ever since Kumogakure and Iwagakure stopped attacking Kanagakure, Minato Namikaze and Jiraiya came to Mount Myaboku to train in sage art under the guidance of Lord Fukasaku. During this process, Minato Namikaze displayed a talent so astonishing that even the Toad Fukasaku was left speechless. While Jiraiya had trained for over a decade without fully mastering Sage Mode, Minato managed to completely master it in less than 2 weeks. This made Fukasaku exclaim that it was unbelievable. However, even though Minato had now mastered Sage Mode and could clearly sense its incredible power, he did not feel happy. On the contrary, he was rather troubled. That was because he realized that Sage Mode didn't really suit his style of combat. Unlike his teacher Jiraiya, who was an offensive-type ninja specializing in ninjutsu, Minato's fighting style was different. First, Sage Art's boost to ninjutsu power didn't significantly benefit Minato. Second, Minato's main combat style revolved around using the Flying Thunder God technique, combined with the Rasengan and ninja tools, to instantly assassinate enemies like a true assassin. Yet Sage Mode required time to gather natural energy, and its active duration lasted only 5 minutes. One emphasized speed, the other emphasized patience. In the time it took to gather natural energy, Minato could have already cleared an entire battlefield using the Flying Thunder God technique. In this sense, Sage Mode seemed almost useless to him. Even so, Minato could not simply abandon Sage Mode. When he shared his concerns with Lord Fukasaku, the Elder Toad said something that Minato would never forget. "Minato, only Sage Arts can counter Sage Arts." Understanding what Fukasaku meant, Minato decided to continue his Sage Mode training. However, this time, he focused his Sage Mode training specifically on developing the Rasengan. Ever since he created the Rasengan, Minato had realized that what he developed was merely its most basic form. There were far more complex variations, namely, by infusing chakra nature transformations into it. Minato had tried before, but due to certain side effects, he had temporarily given up. For instance, he once tried to infuse wind-release chakra nature into the Rasengan. However, because of wind chakra's instability, it caused terrifying damage to his arm. If not for Kushina's help, he would have almost lost the use of his entire arm. However, after beginning to master Sage Art, Minato found that his control over chakra had become significantly more stable. Thus, he once again shifted his focus back to developing the nature transformation of the Rasengan. Dragon Oasis. In the desert at the outskirts. As one of Sunagakure's two top combat forces, Pakura was also training in Sage Art here. Because her secret technique, Scorch Release, was far too special, the intense heat would destroy the forest she had painstakingly nurtured and the small courtyard she had built. She had no choice but to come to the desert to train. After more than half a month of practice, Pakura had now independently completed the ability to sense, absorb, and control Sage Art energy. Next, it was time to develop techniques to integrate Sage Art energy into her jutsu. As the secret technique that Pakura took great pride in, Scorch Release naturally became the main focus of her development. Unlike Minato, whose combat style didn't really align with Sage Energy, Pakura's Scorch Release and Sage Energy could be said to complement each other perfectly. First of all, the presence of Sage Energy greatly extended the amount of time Pakura could maintain her Scorch Release techniques. Especially her strongest move, Scorch Release Chakra Mode. Back when she first developed it, she could only maintain it for 5 minutes at most before her chakra reserves started running dry. After all, she wasn't a tailed beast. To have developed a Scorch Release Chakra Mode similar to a tailed beast cloak, she had to rely on the power of her former Star Release Chakra and push her body's potential to the extreme. But now, with Sage Energy, when she used Scorch Release Chakra Mode, her original chakra consumption was reduced by a third. The reason was simple: Pakura still couldn't use Sage Energy independently. Like the Sage Arts of the three great sacred grounds, she could only mix Sage Energy with chakra. Through her own experimentation and guidance from Tajutsuheim, she achieved a perfect blend at a 2-to-1 ratio. Simply put, where she once needed 3 portions of chakra to power her Scorch Release Chakra Mode, now she needed only 2 portions of chakra, with 1 portion replaced by Sage Energy. Moreover, the gentle nature of Sage Energy greatly improved her control over Scorch Release and reduced unnecessary waste. Now, Pakura could maintain Scorch Release Chakra Mode for 3 times longer than before. From 5 minutes, it had extended to 15 minutes. At first glance, 15 minutes might still seem short, but looked at from another angle, it revealed just how tremendous her progress was. Because now, Pakura was 3 times stronger than she had been before. And that was a conservative estimate. Thanks to the properties of Sage Energy, Pakura's defense in Scorch Release Chakra Mode had also been enhanced, especially her resistance to ninjutsu attacks, reaching a level where she was partly immune. Additionally, the vitality brought by Sage Energy improved her overall life force, healing the hidden damage her body had accumulated over time and greatly strengthening her physique. Most noticeably, as a woman, Pakura could clearly tell that her skin had become more radiant and flawless. Lastly, Pakura also learned a Sage Art from Tajutsuheim, a technique from Ryuchi Cave, inorganic reincarnation. This was absolutely the perfect Sage Art for Pakura. She could imbue the flames she controlled with life, allowing them to transform into various shapes and attack autonomously. This compensated for the once limited variety in Pakura's offensive methods. Using this, she developed a range of new techniques, transforming her flames into all kinds of creatures, greatly enhancing the destructive power and versatility of her Scorch Release. Meanwhile, on the other side of Dragon Oasis, Michikawa, the other top combat force of Sunagakure alongside Pakura, had also successfully mastered Sage Energy and seen a tremendous boost in his strength. Naturally, his focus was on developing his bloodline limit, Magnet Release. Just like Pakura, after mastering Sage Energy, Michikawa gained similar capabilities. His Magnet Release's power was greatly enhanced. Not only had his control over the range and mass of Iron Sand increased, but thanks to Sage Energy's chakra-absorbing properties, the defensive power of the Iron Sand had also risen significantly. Moreover, the vitality brought by Sage Energy made the 30-something-year-old Michikawa feel as if he had returned to his 20s. He, too, learned a sage art from Tajutsuheim. However, unlike Pakura, Michikawa chose the technique of object transmutation. This ability freed him from the dependency on having iron sand nearby. Even in environments with little to no iron sand, he could use object transmutation to directly create iron sand from chakra. Lastly, unlike the proud and reserved Pakura, who couldn't bring herself to ask Rasa for advice, Michikawa had no such reservations. He openly consulted Rasa and, through their discussions on magnet release and sage energy, gained a lot of new inspiration. At that moment, Kumogakure and Iwagakure finally dropped all pretenses and began mobilizing their ninja forces, launching a rapid assault toward the Land of Wind. The reason for such urgency from Kumogakure and Iwagakure was that Sunegakure's secret cooperation with the Land of Demons and the Akatsuki had been exposed. Chapter 162, Initiating War. After Iwagakure and Kumogakure altered their strategic goals, shifting their focus from Konohagakure to Sunegakure, both the Tsuchikage of Iwagakure and the Reikage of Kumogakure realized that things were not developing as they had anticipated. In their plans, since Sunegakure was the weakest among the 5 great shinobi villages, they believed that with a little pressure and trickery, Sunegakure's Kazekage would, just like last time, compromise with Iwagakure and Kumogakure. However, as they carried out their plans step by step, they were met with repeated setbacks. Not only did the shinobi they dispatched to Sunegakure fail to obtain any valuable information, but every action they took ended in failure. Whether it was provoking Sunegakure by sacrificing their own shinobi as poison bait, or joining forces with their respective daimyo to pressure Sunegakure, all their moves were countered one by one. This made both the Tsuchikage and the Reikage increasingly uneasy about the young Kazekage and Sunegakure. Especially the calm demeanor shown by the young Kazekage, which made both sides feel even more unsettled. Originally, they had wanted to wait a little longer, to see if any changes would occur. Such as Konohagakure, who bore deep grudges against Sunegakure, entering the fray, or any other unforeseen developments. However, the latest intelligence from Sunegakure made them realize they could not afford to wait any longer. First, Sunegakure had formed an alliance with the Land of Demons. The Land of Demons would hire Sunegakure's shinobi to protect their country, which meant that for a considerable period, Sunegakure's greatest development obstacle, military funding, would be significantly alleviated. Second, there was news from Amigakure about the organization called Akatsuki, stating that Akatsuki had entered into a cooperation agreement with Sunegakure. Akatsuki's shinobi would act as mercenaries to assist Sunegakure against Iwagakure and Kumogakure. As for Akatsuki, the 2 great villages were naturally aware of their existence. After all, throughout the war, Akatsuki had made their presence known several times. Although in the eyes of the 2 great villages, Akatsuki was still considered a minor and weak organization, their alliance with Sunegakure nonetheless caused deep unease. They had no idea what other strategies this young Kazekage might unleash. Therefore, they had to act decisively before it was too late. Thus, with a tacit understanding, Iwagakure and Kumogakure began to mobilize the shinobi station within the Land of Fire, advancing toward the Land of Wind. As for abandoning Konohagakure, after having invested so much energy and manpower in fighting for half a year, were they unwilling to let go? Of course they were. However, the current situation was still within Iwagakure and Kumogakure's acceptable range. Among the 5 great shinobi villages, rather than completely annihilating one another, maintaining the balance of power between the 5 was also one of the objectives of war. Now, they could say that this objective had been achieved. After half a year of war, with even children being sent to the battlefield, Konohagakure had suffered devastating losses. It would take them several years to recover. This was also the reason why Iwagakure and Kumogakure had to launch an offensive against Sunegakure. The silent rise of Sunegakure had already begun to disrupt the balance of power. Thus, within just a few days, caught between the Land of Wind, the Land of Earth, the Land of Lightning, and Konohagakure were many small countries, scattered across their territories. The figures of shinobi once again became active. The shinobi of Iwagakure and Kumogakure were busily preparing for this coming war. The shinobi of Konohagakure were also lying low, waiting for an opportunity. Even the shinobi of Kirigakure began to appear, constantly gathering intelligence about the state of the entire shinobi world. However, something surprised everyone. The very focal point of this upcoming war, Sunagakure, showed an unexpectedly calm demeanor, as if all the chaos outside had nothing to do with them. Land of Wind, Sunagakure. Thanks to Sunagakure's recent rapid development, more and more outsiders had been entering the village, inevitably bringing news from the outside world with them. Aside from ordinary people fleeing the chaos and merchants hoping to make their fortune in Sunagakure, spies from various countries and villages were, of course, among them. These spies came not only to smuggle out Sunagakure's intelligence, but also with hopes of causing internal sabotage. Yet something puzzled them deeply. The outside world was on the verge of erupting into chaos, anyone could feel the tension in the air. And yet, inside Sunagakure, everything remained calm, as if nothing unusual was happening. Not only were Sunagakure's shinobi continuing to go about their tasks as usual, even the village leadership showed no sign of mobilizing forces for defense. This left the spies utterly baffled. They could clearly see that it wasn't just them, even the villagers and shinobi within Sunagakure were unsure of what was happening. Both Iwagakure and Kumogakure had already made their intentions to go to war clear, yet Sunagakure remained completely unmoved. Could it be they planned to surrender? Everyone knew that was impossible. Just as confusion spread, a piece of news, said to have been personally conveyed by Baki, the head of the Umbu, spread throughout the village. Tell everyone in the village not to overthink. All they need to know is that Kazekage-sama is fully prepared. The only ones who will emerge victorious in this war will be us, Sunagakure. Of course, many people still harbored doubts in their hearts. But over the past year, the prestige Rasa had built up and his repeated successes helped the villagers of Sunagakure temporarily put their worries to rest. However, the spies couldn't calm down so easily. They immediately transmitted the information out. Upon receiving this intelligence, the leaders of the various shinobi villages all frowned deeply. They could not help but hesitate. After all, Rasa's two prior operations against Kanahadakure had already instilled a strong sense of caution toward this young Kazekage. Could it be that he had yet another hidden trump card? No matter how much the Third Shinobi and the Third Raikage racked their brains, they couldn't figure out what means Rasa could possibly have to be so confident in the face of the joint forces of Iwagakure and Kumogakure. Still, they firmly believed one thing. Before overwhelming strength, all schemes and tricks were useless. Enough of this posturing. Katsuchi, tell the shinobi on the front lines to immediately launch an offensive against the Land of Wind. I want to see what this brat can possibly do. Hi! As the shinobi of Iwagakure began to move, the shinobi of Kumogakure, after receiving the message, also sprang into action. In an instant, the entire shinobi world descended into chaos once more. At the same time, in Sunagakure, within the Land of Wind, the shinobi gathered together at the Kazekage Tower upon receiving the news. Chapter 163, Countermeasures. Sunagakure, Kazekage Tower. Since Rasa revealed the existence of the Dragon Oasis to everyone, this is the first time they have gathered together again. The two elders of Sunagakure, Chiyo and Ebizo. The Jinchuriki of Shikaku, One-Tail Bunpuku. The two top figures of Sunagakure with combat power, Pakura and Michikawa. The head of the Umbu, Baki. Rasa's assistant, Saramu. The current head of the Sunagakure Medical Department, Iris. The current head of the Sunagakure Logistics Department, Ruji. The current head of the Sunagakure Ninja Hospital, Yashimaru. The current head of the Sunagakure Orphanage, Karura. The future successor of Chiyo, Hana, and the future successor of Ebizo, Anoka. For the sake of confidentiality, only a few people were qualified to know and be present here. Everyone had already heard about the news of Iwagakure and Kumogakure advancing toward the Land of Wind. They all looked up with nervous and expectant expressions toward the Kazekage, who had created countless miracles. Rasa, now the person with the highest authority in Sunagakure, looked down below. Finally, he spoke his plan. Everyone, you must have heard the news from outside. I won't waste too many words. With our current strength, it's almost impossible for us to directly confront Iwagakure and Kumogakure. If Sunagakure wants to win this war, there is only one way. I call it the Decapitation operation. At this point, Rasa looked toward Baki beside him and said, Baki, introduce the intel the Umbu has gathered. Hi. As Baki moved, a map of the ninja world appeared before everyone. Baki had already prepared and marked the map. Everyone, please look. According to the intel our Umbu received, Iwagakure and Kumogakure have mobilized a total of 16,000 ninja, divided into 4 battlefronts to attack our land of wind. First battlefront, 6,000 ninja from Iwagakure, attacking from the direction of the land of birds. Leading them are Iwagakure's 2 Jinchuriki, namely, the 5-tails Jinchuriki, Han, and the 4-tails Jinchuriki, Rashi. Second battlefront, 4,000 ninja from Kumogakure, attacking from the sea. Leading them are Kumogakure's magnet release ninja, Toroi and Darui. Third battlefront, 2,000 ninja from Iwagakure, attacking from the direction of the land of rain. They were originally part of the Iwagakure forces that attacked Konoha. Leading them is Iwagakure's explosion release ninja, Gari. Fourth battlefront, 4,000 ninja from Kumogakure, also part of the previous forces that attacked Konoha, launching a surprise attack from the direction of the land of rivers. Leading them is the Kumogakure AB combination. Upon hearing Baki's explanation and looking at the 4 lines on the map that surrounded the entire land of wind, the group in the room had serious expressions. Chio squinted her eyes and sighed. Iwagakure and Kumogakure really aren't holding back. Baki continued. Of the 4 battlefronts, the first battlefront from Iwagakure is geographically the easiest to reach the border of our land of wind. Although it is slower due to the large troop size, they are expected to reach the border in about 2 days, by nightfall. After a pause, Baki held a confident smile. As for the third and fourth battlefronts, while they are currently within the borders of the land of fire, and geographically relatively close to the land of wind, their supply lines are slow, and because they are within the land of fire, it will take them 5 days to reach us. The second battlefront is the slowest, requiring 7 days. However, since they are coming by sea, their supply lines and the morale of the ninja are the highest, and their stamina will not be depleted as quickly. After explaining the whole plan like a pro, he bowed to Rasa. Kazekage-sama, that's all I have to report. Rasa nodded and continued speaking to everyone. First, there is no need to worry about the third battlefront. I have already asked members of the Akatsuki to help us hold off the 2,000 Iwagakure ninja. Hearing this, everyone visibly relaxed. However, the remaining 14,000 ninjas still pose a threat to us. This is still beyond the capability of Sunagakure to handle directly. Fortunately, our enemies have given us an opportunity by splitting their forces. If we only have to deal with one battlefront, it's still manageable. It seemed like Michikawa understood something and spoke up. I see now. Kazekage-sama, your decapitation operation is to gather all our forces and strike down one of the heads first, forcing Iwagakure and Kumogakure to hesitate? Rasa nodded appreciatively. Michikawa, you're correct, but that's only half of it. Half? Aside from Baki, who already knew Rasa's plan, the others were surprised, and then they heard something that left them speechless. Yes, we will strike down one head, but it's not by gathering all of Sunagakure's forces. It will be only the 3 of us, me, you, and Pakura. Everyone's pupils contracted, and Karura, as Rasa's wife, immediately showed an expression of extreme concern. Ebizo couldn't help but speak up. This is impossible. It's too dangerous. Kazekage, as the village's leader, you absolutely cannot take such a risk alone. Rasa understood the concern. As the leader, it wasn't ideal to put himself in such danger, but he was confident. Don't worry, Ebizo-sama. I'm confident in my decision, which is why I made it. After speaking, Rasa looked at the surprised Michikawa and Pakura. And you too? If Minato Namikaze of Konoha could fight 100 enemies by himself, now that you have mastered Senjutsu, do you not have this much confidence? Pakura couldn't stand the challenge. TCH, who's scared? Since you want to go crazy, Kazekage-sama, I'll join you in your madness. Michikawa was more composed, but after thinking for a moment, he made his decision. I understand now. Since you, Kazekage, have this confidence, as a member of the village, I won't hesitate. With the 3 representatives of the village's highest combat strength agreeing to the risky plan, the rest of the room felt conflicted, but ultimately, it was Chiyo who spoke up. Kazekage-sama, are you going to strike the head first? Rasa looked at the map, his gaze fixed on the direction of the land of birds. Since this is a decapitation, we need to cut off the head that will hurt them the most. There's no head more influential to this battlefield than these 2 Jinchuriki. Everyone immediately understood that Rasa had chosen the 6,000 Iwagakure ninja led by the 2 Jinchuriki as the target. In order to ensure the success of our decapitation plan, the village will need to make some preparations. Elders, you, along with Fuka, will lead the ninja from the village to meet the AB brothers from Kumogakure. Chapter 164, A Plan Within a Plan. Mount Myaboku. Though Minato Namikaze was still training here, ever since he learned that Iwagakure and Kumogakure had officially begun their assault on Sunagakure, he had been closely monitoring the movements of the ninja world. His source of information was none other than Jiraiya-sensei, who had brought news from the village. Amidst the tall grass, Minato was developing his new ninjutsu, which he had named Spiral Wind Release Super Spinning Roar Technique. Although the name was somewhat hard to take seriously, the technique itself, a fusion of wind-style chakra nature transformation and the Rasengan, demonstrated destructive power that even Lord Fukasaku found astonishing. At that moment, Jiraiya, dressed in casual clothes, appeared before Minato. Unlike Minato, who could calmly continue his training, Jiraiya's personality seemed to make him restless, so he frequently moved between the village and Mount Myaboku. Seeing Jiraiya's serious expression, Minato immediately realized that something significant must have happened in the outside world. He anxiously asked, Jiraiya-sensei, has Sunagakure taken action? Jiraiya nodded, sensing his disciple's emotional shift, and pulled out a scroll. Minato took the scroll and immediately began reading it carefully. The intelligence detailed that 2 hours ago, Sunagakure, which had been completely quiet until then, suddenly mobilized 2/3 of its ninja forces. In an unexpectedly swift manner, they departed the village, and based on their direction, it could be inferred that the target was the land of rivers. After reading, Minato furrowed his brow. Is Sunagakure trying to take the initiative? As the frontline commander of Konoha, Minato's military expertise was high. Based on the intelligence, he could quickly discern Sunagakure's objective. Jiraiya also nodded solemnly. That's probably the case. From what we can see, this is Sunagakure's only way out. But whether it will succeed or not remains uncertain. Minato glanced at the information and thoughtfully spoke. Since we, Konoha, have received this intel, then Kumogakure and Iwagakure likely have it too. And although Iwagakure and Kumogakure have formed an alliance on the surface, it's impossible for them to fight with the same resolve. What this means is that a 4,000 versus 4,000 battle puts Sunagakure at an advantage in terms of high-level combat power. It's quite possible they could win in one battle. However, there's something odd. Sunagakure's target isn't the Iwagakure ninja on the first battlefront. Doesn't that mean the Land of Wind is now vulnerable internally, and Iwagakure's ninja can advance without resistance? Jiraiya understood, thought for a moment, and responded. Perhaps Sunagakure feels that facing Iwagakure's 2 Jinchuriki and 4,000 ninja is too risky. They don't have the confidence to win in one blow. If they did that, they'd risk being caught in a pincer attack. Sunagakure can afford to trade time for geography. After all, the Land of Wind is vast and its terrain is harsh. If Iwagakure invades from the direction of the Land of Birds, it would take at least 4 to 5 days to threaten Sunagakure. Furthermore, because they are in the Land of Wind, Iwagakure won't be able to advance recklessly. Minato nodded. That makes sense. This is probably the best countermeasure Sunagakure can come up with right now. Moreover, even the aged one-tailed Jinchuriki has been mobilized, which shows that Sunagakure is going all out. However, what's wrong? Seeing Minato still tensed, Jiraiya curiously asked. Minato thought for a moment before voicing his concerns. Jiraiya-sensei, I just feel that something isn't right. It feels like the Kazekage's plan isn't as simple as it seems. Jiraiya was momentarily confused. He recalled the intelligence they had received from the village and then suddenly thought of something. There's a piece of information that hasn't been confirmed yet, but it came from Danzo's root. It said that Kirigakure is actually seeking an alliance with Sunagakure. Kiri! Is that confirmed? We don't have definitive confirmation on whether they've actually formed an alliance yet, but according to Danzo's report, he has a special information channel in Sunagakure, and he did see high-ranking members of Kirigakure in Sunagakure. These include two of the current Third Mizukage's close confidants, Kiri's Yagura Karatachi and Mangetsu Ozuki. The mention of these names made Minato's eyes widen in shock, as both were renowned figures in Kirigakure. Although Minato despised Danzo's methods, he had no doubt about Root's intelligence capabilities. So, Kirigakure might be joining this war? Minato was genuinely surprised. The Kazekage was becoming more and more difficult to understand. Jiraiya shook his head. The village considered the possibility, but ultimately rejected it. Why? Well, Jiraiya's expression became slightly awkward. Perhaps to remind his disciple of some facts, he explained in detail. The third Mizukage of Kirigakure is very special. In a village dominated by bloodline clans, such as Kirigakure, the Mizukage is just an ordinary commoner by birth. Most of the power in Sunagakure is held by the three major clans. Whether Kirigakure can join the battlefield isn't really up to the Mizukage, and those three major bloodline families would never agree to help Sunagakure. Why not? Do you remember the woman from Sunagakure, the one you fought, Pakura? Minato nodded. Let me put it this way. Her secret technique, the Scorch Release, is a natural counter to the clans of Kirigakure, especially the Hozuki clan and the Hashigaki clan. Over the years, many of the Hozuki and Mizuno clan ninja have died at her hands. It's because of this that she gained such a large reputation, even enough to challenge for the position of Kazekage. So, Kirigakure will never assist Sunagakure. Even if the third Mizukage agreed, he wouldn't be able to mobilize the village's forces. I see. Minato fell into deep thought, but still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. After considering for a while, he asked again. Is there really no chance at all? I still feel like the Kazekage's plans aren't that simple. Jiraiya saw the tense marks on Minato's forehead and understood that the Kazekage had caused Konoha to suffer defeats twice, making Minato a little overly cautious when facing him. But that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. After thinking for a moment, Jiraiya spoke. It's not entirely impossible, but unless the Mizukage can offer something that the three major clans can't refuse, there's no way. If there really was such a bargaining chip, the Mizukage wouldn't have ended up in such an awkward position. Jiraiya's words suddenly made Minato's eyes light up. Bargaining chip! In that instant, a flood of thoughts rushed through Minato's mind, and countless images flashed before his eyes. Finally, his thoughts settled on his wife, Kushina Uzumaki, and his pupils dilated. Sensei, I understand now. Kirigakure might really be getting involved in the war. What? Minato immediately spoke the conclusion he had reached. Sealing Jutsu, the Uzumaki clan sealing Jutsu. Don't forget that Kirigakure has both the three tails and six tails. Jiraiya's pupils also shrank in realization. Chapter 165, The Beheading Begins, 1. The vast desert of the Land of Wind. Rasa, Michikawa, and Pakura, all dressed in green ninja uniforms, rushed through the desert. Under Rasa's explanation, the two of them had finally understood the preparations that Rasa had made for this victory. Pakura couldn't help but express his feelings. No wonder you even called Karura to participate in the meeting. So, you had already planned to use that spy, Nono Yakushi, all along? Michikawa also praised. I didn't expect that Spy Nono could be used in this way. No wonder Kazekage-sama wanted to keep her around. Yes, spies are a double-edged sword. From the moment we learned about her identity, she has already become our weapon against Konoha. Michikawa nodded in agreement. That means, at least for now, we don't have to worry about Konoha taking advantage of us. Pakura thought for a moment before speaking. But what if Konoha doesn't believe it? They also have their own intelligence channels in Kiridakure. Rasa's answer was simple. That's not important. We don't need Konoha to believe that Kiridakure will help us. As long as they suspect it, that's enough. Also, we aren't lying. The Mizukage really did send his close confidants to Sunagakure. Seeing that Rasa had even managed to use this, Michikawa couldn't help but sigh. If the Mizukage knew that his little cleverness was being used by you, Kazekage-sama, he'd probably get so angry it'd give him a stroke. That's not our problem. But, if Konoha can pass this information on to Iwagakure and Kumogakure, the situation will be even more advantageous for us. At that moment, sensing something, Rasa stopped in his tracks. From the rocks in the desert, a small white snake emerged, speaking human language. Rasa-sama, the positions of Iwagakure's ninja have been confirmed. Rasa's guess was not wrong. After Jiraiya urgently relayed Minato's deductions to the village, Konoha's higher-ups immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation and suspected that Sunagakure and Kiridakure had indeed formed an alliance. Kiridakure, in the past, had been willing to destroy the Uzumaki clan for the sealing techniques. Now, it was very likely they would ally with Sunagakure for the same purpose. No wonder Sunagakure remained so calm in the face of the alliance between Kumogakure and Iwagakure. If Kiridakure secretly assisted them, Kumogakure and Iwagakure could indeed suffer a great loss. This quickly extinguished the thoughts of some people in Konoha who had hoped to take advantage of the situation. And as the leader of Root, Danzo also did not disappoint Rasa's expectations. Upon receiving the information, he immediately passed it on to Iwagakure and Kumogakure through Root. Danzo, who clearly hated the Fourth Kazekage more than Konoha's casualties, had lost his Sharingan and arm to him, as well as his path to further study the Sharingan and the first Hokage's powers. Iwagakure and Kumogakure quickly received the unexpected information. The higher-ups of both sides were stunned. Because from their perspective, the alliance between Sunagakure and Kiridakure was the only explanation for Sunagakure's calm demeanor. After analyzing the current battle situation, both Iwagakure and Kumogakure made changes. Among them, Kumogakure reacted the most. Their forces were at risk of facing a direct threat from Kiridakure's ninja, so Kumogakure immediately issued an order for their forces stationed in the Land of Rivers to retreat. This was to avoid being caught between the forces of Kiridakure arriving by sea and Sunagakure coming from the Land of Wind. The naval ninja forces slowed their pace accordingly. Iwagakure, on the other hand, did not react as strongly. This was because Iwagakure's two lines of attack against Sunagakure were in the smaller country's inland, far from Kiridakure's reach. Even if Kiridakure had intentions of launching an attack, they would not be able to reach them in time. However, to be safe, Inoki still had his Umbu relay this information. As time passed, the situation in the ninja world grew even more unpredictable. After a day of long travel, Iwagakure's army of 6,000 ninja, led by 2 Jinchuriki, finally reached the border between the Land of Birds and the Land of Wind. They did not rush forward but chose to rest, waiting for reports from their vanguard. Before long, 3 ninja appeared. Report, Rashi-sama, Han-sama, we've already scouted ahead. There are no Sunagakure ninja in sight. This made the leader, the Four-Tails Jinchuriki Rashi, frown deeply. Although he had already received word from the village that Sunagakure had mobilized all its forces, including the elderly One-Tails Jinchuriki, to move toward the Land of Rivers, the lack of enemy presence made their situation somewhat awkward. Theoretically, entering the Land of Wind and attacking Sunagakure while its forces were thin would have been the best choice. However, the harsh desert environment, issues like water shortages, getting lost, sandstorms, and the dangers of prolonged battle lines could easily lead to them being caught in a pincer attack. This was probably why Sunagakure felt secure enough not to set up defenses here. At this moment, Han, the five-tails Jinchuriki wearing armor and a conical hat, asked the question on his mind. What should we do now, senpai? Should we camp here, or push forward into the land of wind? Although Han had an additional tail compared to the four-tails Jinchuriki, Rashi was older and had been a Jinchuriki for longer. Rashi belonged to the same generation as Inoki, so it was not inappropriate for Han to address him as senpai. Not so fast, Rashi said, then turned to the vanguard squad. Are you sure? Not even one? Hi. One of the three, a sensory ninja, confidently replied. Rashi-sama, I haven't detected any chakra signatures within my range. This was highly suspicious. Rashi looked ahead at the vast desert, feeling as though it was like a pocket waiting for a Wagakure's ninja to step into it. The unease in his heart led him to give the order. Scout again, several times if necessary. Yes. After the three ninja left, Rashi turned to Han and explained. We're carrying the lives of over 6,000 of our village's ninja. It's crucial that we proceed cautiously. Let's confirm everything first before making a decision. Han nodded seriously upon hearing this. At that moment, an Umbu ninja appeared beside Rashi, handing him a scroll. Rashi-sama, this is intelligence from the village. Rashi took the scroll and, after a brief glance, his expression shifted in surprise. I see. No wonder the Kazekage is so bold. He's actually formed an alliance with Kirigakure? This news seemed to ease Rashi's unease. Rashi handed the scroll to Han, who after reading it, understood what Sunagakure was planning and asked. Rashi-senpai, what should we do now? Rashi furrowed his brows, thinking for a moment, and then made his decision. To delay the battlefield and drag it to a more favorable position for the enemy would be foolish. So what should we do? Advance along the land of wind's border toward the land of rivers and rendezvous with the forces entering the land of rain. Meanwhile, we'll launch a pincer attack on Sunagakure's forces from both the front and the rear. Just as he made his decision, a rumbling sound echoed from the ground. What's going on? Iwagakure's ninja quickly located the source of the noise. What? What is that? From the far distance, towering sand dunes hundreds of meters high loomed, sweeping toward Iwagakure's forces like a wall of sand. Chapter 166, Sand vs. Rock. At the border between the land of wind and the land of birds. Under the scorching sun and a cloudless sky. Rasa, Pakura, and Michikawa stood on a floating cloud of sand high in the sky. Their gazes were fixed downward on the rock desert, where the densely packed Iwagakure shinobi formed four neat formations. Even though the distance between them was only 2 or 3 kilometers in a straight line, the sensory shinobi from Iwagakure below could not detect their presence. First, because their current position was high in the sky. Second, after training with Sage Art Energy, although Pakura and Michikawa could not replace all the chakra in their bodies with Sage Energy like Rasa, they could still interfere with the sensory abilities of shinobi. Those two must be the Jinchuriki from Iwagakure. Pakura, being younger, had rarely fought against the two Jinchuriki of Iwagakure, but Michikawa was different. During the previous Shinobi World War, he had already witnessed the power of Rashi. Rashi, the Jinchuriki of the Four Tails, is of the same generation as Inoki, only a few years younger. His lava release is extremely powerful, and his mastery over the tailed beast's power has reached the level of complete transformation. He then looked at the other of the two Jinchuriki. As for Han, the Jinchuriki of the Five Tails, he is someone Iwagakure has cultivated only in recent years. Although young, he has already demonstrated the ability to fully transform during battles against Kanagakure. Besides that, he is a secret technique user, able to use an ability called Vapor Release, granting himself astonishing speed and strength. After listening to the intel provided by Michikawa, Rasa turned his head slightly to glance at the two and asked, "Have you chosen your opponents?" Pakura, eager, immediately responded, "I'll take on the Four Tails Jinchuriki. I really want to see whose lava release is stronger, his or my scorch release. Michikawa, seeing this, did not argue and said calmly, "Then I'll handle the 5 tails." Rasa nodded in agreement, then calculated the time and said, "I'll give you only half an hour. If you can't finish them within that time, I'll step in personally." "No problem." "Understood." Seeing the two agree, Rasa finally turned his gaze back downward to the dense ranks of Awabikure shinobi, his expression darkening as he brought his hands together in a seal. "Then, let me greet the shinobi of Awabikure first." As he spoke, the 3 descended from the sky, with Rasa forming a seal. Sage Arts, Magnet Release, Flowing Sand Waterfall. Boom! In an instant, the entire Gobi Desert began to tremble, the ground cracked open with fissures, and countless grains of yellow sand surged up like a tidal wave, blotting out the sun as they swept toward the Awabikure shinobi. At this moment, the entire Gobi Desert turned into a sea of sand. "What is this?" The sudden assault shocked the shinobi of Awabikure. The sand waves, like a massive tsunami darkening the sky, struck fear into the faces of many younger Awabikure shinobi. Fortunately, the shinobi of Awabikure were well prepared. Although they had no idea where the attack was coming from, countless jonin from Awabikure immediately leapt to the front of their forces, facing the overwhelming sand head-on, forming hand seals one after another. Earth Release, Great Mud Wall. In an instant, towering earthen walls, resembling a never-ending great wall, rose to shield all the Awabikure shinobi. The sand wave collided with the earthen wall, producing a booming sound that made the earth tremble. Although the sand wave was blocked, the Awabikure shinobi grew even more tense. What's going on? Didn't the sensory team detect any Suna shinobi? What were the vanguard troops doing? Fortunately, the Awabikure forces had reacted quickly. Otherwise, if such a large-scale attack had hit them directly, the casualties would have been devastating. Just then, an Awabikure sensory shinobi suddenly perceived something and pointed in terror toward the top of the earthen wall. There's someone! All the Awabikure shinobi immediately pulled out their kunai, staring warily in the direction the sensory shinobi indicated. Under the glaring sunlight, at the collision point between the massive earthen wall and the sand wave, 3 dark figures slowly appeared before their eyes. When the Awabikure shinobi finally saw the faces of the 3 ninjas, fear crept onto their faces. That's Suna's Kazekage, Scorch Release Pakura, Magnet Release Michikawa. How could this be? Wasn't the intel saying they went to the land of rivers? So that's it, their real target was us. This thought flashed through the minds of all the Awabikure shinobi, and as the commander of the unit, Rashi naturally thought the same. He became even more vigilant, nervously scanning the surroundings, afraid that his forces had fallen into an enemy trap. However, just then, the sensory ninja beside him once again formed a seal, trying hard to sense the area, and spoke in confusion. How could this be? What's happening? Rashi barked angrily, furious that the sensory ninja had failed in his duties. The sensory ninja, unable to understand it himself, replied in a panicked voice. Rashi-sama, I can't sense anything. Within a 10-kilometer radius, there are still no other chakra presences. Rashi's first instinct was, of course, disbelief. But the Suna shinobi atop the massive wall gave them no more time to think. The Scorch Release user Pakura and the Magnet Release user Michikawa had already leapt from the wall, charging directly toward the Awabikure forces with an overwhelming aura, as if 2 were about to take on 6,000. Midair. Pakura stared coldly at the Awabikure shinobi below, who had yet to react, and her hands moved without hesitation. Scorch Release, Firefly. In an instant, countless tiny fireballs, like glowing fireflies, appeared behind her. Like scattered dandelions, they floated gently down toward the Awabikure shinobi. Their slow speed and small size puzzled the Awabikure shinobi. These didn't seem very destructive at all. Still, they instinctively drew their kunai and hurled them at the floating fireballs. Since the fireballs were so slow, it was easy to strike them with kunai. However, the scene they expected, the fireballs dispersing upon impact, didn't happen. Instead, once hit, the fireballs split into 2, continuing to drift down toward the Iwabikure forces. Seeing this, a slight smile tugged at the corners of Pakura's mouth. As the Four Tails Jinchuriki, Rashi immediately sensed at the moment the fireballs got close, these seemingly harmless little orbs contained terrifying amounts of heat. Watch out! But his warning came too late. The quicker fireballs had already fallen into the densely packed formations of Iwabikure shinobi. Any shinobi touched by the fireballs immediately let out a blood-curdling scream, their entire bodies steaming as if boiled alive, then blackening into dried corpses as if scorched. The horrifying scene made cold sweat break out on the foreheads of all the Iwabikure shinobi. When they looked up, they saw that a mass of fireballs was continuing to rain down from the sky. Ah! The Iwabikure forces fell into chaos instantly, their screams echoing across the desert. Meanwhile, having landed, Michikawa formed hand seals as well. Magnet Release, Iron Sand Drizzle. Chapter 167, Scorch vs. Lava. As a mature and composed man, Michikawa's first attack was not like Pakura's, as he did not immediately use the newly gained power. Instead, he still employed the basic magnet release. However, this did not mean his strength was inferior. After all, the magnet release, Iron Sand technique had once made the Third Kazekage earn the title of the strongest Kazekage. As chakra surged within Michikawa's body, countless grains of iron sand shot up from the earth beneath his feet, gathering around him to form a pitch-black wall of iron sand. From the wall, countless black kunai flew out, transforming into a rain of arrows that shot toward the Iwabikure shinobi. Under the joint assault of Pakura and Michikawa, the Iwabikure shinobi formation fell into complete chaos at the very first clash. The Jonin and Chunin naturally used earth-release ninjutsu to protect themselves and their comrades, but there were still many places they could not cover. Especially the Genin, who immediately became cannon fodder on the battlefield. In an instant, cries of agony echoed across the land. Facing such wide-range, long-distance lethal ninjutsu, the Iwabikure shinobi could not just sit and wait to die. As the commander of this unit, Rashi immediately gave the order. Go and take out the two jutsu casters. Hi! At once, dozens of Iwabikure Jonin stepped forward and charged toward Pakura and Michikawa. These Jonin were well aware of the reputation of Scorch Release Pakura and Magnet Release Michikawa. Naturally, none of them thought they could handle either opponent alone, so they attacked together. Just as they were about to reach the two, suddenly, everyone sensed something appearing above their heads, casting a massive shadow over the ground. As seasoned Jonin, their reaction speed was extremely quick. They immediately leapt to the sides. At the very moment they dodged, an enormous object crashed down from the sky, slamming heavily into the ground with a deafening boom. Then they finally saw what it was. They were giant creatures resembling tanuki, massive as small mountains. They had humanoid physiques clad in armor, each wielding a shield in one hand and a large sword in the other, looking like heavily armed samurai. What are these monsters? While they were still stunned, Pakura and Michikawa's figures flew past overhead, directly bypassing them to assault the Iwabikure shinobi from behind. The Jonin wanted to pursue, but these tanuki monsters, their eyes glowing a fierce crimson, blocked their path. The huge blades in their hands came crashing down. Is this puppet technique? At the front of the Iwabikure forces, Rashi's expression turned grim as he stared at the suddenly appearing giant creatures. Especially since these monsters could actually hold off the village's Jonin. But he had no time to worry about that now because the two Suna shinobi were already launching their assault on the Iwabikure forces. Still, only two of them, wasn't that a bit too few? From the start of the battle until now, aside from the still motionless Kazekage, they had not seen any other Suna shinobi. Just then, Rashi suddenly noticed, Pakura and Michikawa's direction of attack seemed to be aimed straight at him. Suddenly, Rashi realized the truth. His gaze shifted toward Rasa, who stood motionless in the distance. So that's it. This is Sunagakure's real plan? Rashi's words left everyone around him stunned. Rashi-senpai, what do you mean? With a heavy tone, Rashi explained. The Kazekage of Sunagakure intends to capture the two of us, the Jinchuriki, to use as leverage against the village, forcing the war to end. This time, everyone was truly shocked. You're kidding, right? They only have 3 people, and we have 6,000. Besides, Rashi-sama and Han-sama, you two are Jinchuriki. The Iwabikure shinobi instantly erupted in protest, which angered Han. He grunted and roared. Even arrogance has its limits. Han, still young and impulsive, immediately became furious, but Rashi remained solemn, his brow furrowed. As a Jinchuriki, he naturally had strong confidence in his own power. But the opponent was the Kazekage of Sunagakure. He was no fool. Since he was so brave enough to make such a bold move, he surely had some sort of trump card. Thinking this, as he watched Pakura and Michikawa rapidly approaching, Rashi made a decision and stepped forward. Han, get ready. Let's move! Why now? Rather than sitting here waiting passively, we should strike first and see what they're planning. Besides, letting the others from the village go up against them would only be sending them to their deaths. Han understood Rashi's intent. He nodded and stepped forward as well. At that moment, the two of them began to undergo rapid transformations. Chakra surged as Rashi's entire body became enveloped in searing magma, radiating an intense heat, while white steam gushed out from the seams of Han's armor, emitting a high-pitched shriek. Be careful, here we go. Yeah. In an instant, the two shot forward, launching themselves toward the enemy at an unbelievable speed. They're coming. Mid-charge, Pakura and Michikawa immediately noticed the 2 incoming Jinchuriki. It surprised them a little as they had thought they would have to take down a few more Iwabikure shinobi to lure them out. But this was even better. Seeing Rashi cloaked in the lava-release chakra mode, Pakura's expression brightened with excitement. She immediately activated her own scorch-release chakra mode, transforming into a stream of flames that overtook Michikawa and charged ahead. Of course, she knew to hold something back since right now, she only activated the basic scorch-release chakra mode. Thus, under the astonished gazes of everyone present, on the desolate wasteland, a man of fire and a man of magma, both radiating terrifying heat, clashed together. Boom! The immense heat generated a vacuum zone around their collision, and scorching steam blew everything away nearby. Rashi was momentarily shocked. He had certainly heard of Pakura of Sunagakure and her scorch release, but he hadn't expected her scorch release to rival his own lava release. His lava release had been cultivated with the chakra of a tailed beast, after all. Feeling the heat emanating from Rashi's lava release, Pakura smirked and said, Four Tails Jinchuriki, it seems your lava release isn't all that impressive, is it? Meanwhile, on the other side, Michikawa watched as Han, surrounded by steaming mist, like a roaring locomotive, charged toward him at incredible speed. He immediately formed hand seals. Magnet release, iron sand cylinder. Above his head, the countless grains of iron sand rapidly condensed into a massive cylindrical form, shooting toward the onrushing Five Tails Jinchuriki. Chapter 168, Madara Uchiha. At the very moment when the great forces of Sunagakure and Iwabikure clashed. At a ruined village far from the battlefield, amidst the crumbled remains. The earth twisted, and a figure slowly rose. Cloaked in a hooded coat, wearing a white mask that revealed a single blood-red Sharingan eye, he emanated an aura as chilling as death itself. His gaze drifted slowly toward the distant battlefield. He first glanced at the battling shinobi of Sunagakure and Iwabikure with an expression of disdain. Then, as the 3 tomo of his Sharingan spun, his eyes locked onto the towering figure atop the distant earth wall. In an aged, hoarse voice, he murmured, Interesting. So that's the current Kazekage of Sunagakure? From the same body, a second, comical voice answered. Yes, Madara-sama, that is the 4th Kazekage, Rasa. Madara Uchiha seemed mildly intrigued. A curious power indeed, it's a little like Hashirama's sage art. Even my senses cannot detect him fully. Madara-sama, should we get rid of him? What if he disrupts your plans? Madara paused as if he shook his head. No need to rush. Let me observe this power first. After all, it's rare to have an opportunity to walk outside like this. Let's see just how much the little brats of today's shinobi world have grown. As Madara's voice fell silent. On the distant battlefield, the clash between Tsunagekyu's Pakura and Michikawa and Iwabikyu's Jinchuriki Rashi and Han was reaching its peak. As time passed, the battlefield between Scorch Release Pakura and Lava Release Rashi, the fight was getting heated. Both, relying on the advantages of their bloodline limit and secret techniques, had naturally chosen the most direct and efficient way to fight, pure taijutsu clashes. After several probing exchanges, they realized that, due to the similarity of their abilities, neither's ninjutsu could easily overpower the other. Though Pakura was a woman, she was in no way inferior to Rashi when it came to taijutsu. Meanwhile, on the other battlefield, Magnet Release, Iron Sand's unrivaled offensive and defensive capabilities were firmly suppressing the speed and strength granted by Han's Boil Release. No matter how powerful the Five Tails Jinchuriki's strength was, against the absolute defense constructed from Iron Sand, he found it hard to make any progress. No matter how fast he was, he couldn't outpace the Sand Iron. And what's more, Michikawa had one clear advantage that Han did not: he could form wings from Iron Sand and fly freely through the air, completely dominating the aerial battlefield. Han could only suffer attacks passively from the ground. From Iwabikyu's side, watching the astonishing battles unfolding before them, the Genin and Chunin of Iwabikyu were left utterly shocked. After all, in any village, bloodline limit and secret techniques were rare treasures. Battles like this were things ordinary shinobi could live their whole lives without witnessing even once, yet now, they were seeing them play out right before their eyes. The sheer destructive power and dazzling spectacle left the Iwabikyu shinobi in awe of the strength of their two Jinchuriki, but for the first time, they also realized Tsunagakure had such terrifyingly powerful shinobi too. As for the Jonin, they all wore grave expressions. As expected of Tsunagakure's renowned Scorch Release and Magnet Release shinobi, they can actually go toe-to-toe with our two Jinchuriki. Even so, they remained full of confidence in their village's Jinchuriki, because until now, neither Rashi nor Han had revealed their tailed beast powers. However, a shadow of concern lingered. Tsunagakure's true trump card, their Kazekage, had yet to make a move. Quick, report this information to the Kazekage-sama. Understood. After giving the order, the Iwabikyu shinobi continued to watch the battlefield with tense gazes. Realizing that their bloodline limit and secret techniques were not particularly effective against each other, and in order to conserve chakra, both sides tacitly cancelled their Lava Release and Scorch Release chakra modes. Lava Release, Melting Rock River Jutsu. With Rashi forming hand seals, countless massive lava fireballs surged toward Pakura. These lava fireballs not only carried terrifying heat, but the burning, heavy rocks also held devastating impact force. Though Pakura wasn't afraid of heat, she dared not let herself be smashed by those massive rocks. With nimble, flowing movements, she weaved between the lava fireballs while forming her own hand seals. Scorch Release, Rabbit Jade. Countless flames appeared at her sides, and as they fell to the ground, they transformed into blazing rabbits that charged at Rashi. Rashi tried to intercept the flame rabbits by spitting fireballs, but quickly realized something odd. Despite their numbers, the flame rabbits moved with an unnatural agility, almost as if they possessed a will of their own. He had no choice but to dodge nimbly as well. Meanwhile, on the other side, Han, the Five Tails Jinchuriki, was growing more and more frustrated. As a user of Boil Release, he could raise his chakra to the boiling point, exploding with monstrous strength. How monstrous was it? He could punch away a sand iron cylinder the size of a small mountain weighing over 10 tons with a single blow. But it was useless. His opponent only needed to break the unified sand iron cylinder back into individual particles to disperse the impact. Worse, the enemy could fly. Flight is something that even in a Iwabikyu, only the Tsukage with lightweight rock technique can achieve. By flying, Michikawa easily controlled the battlefield from above, using his sand iron to attack Han as if he were merely a stationary training post. As a young man, Han naturally had a temper. After being battered passively for several minutes, he finally lost his patience. From above, Michikawa, riding on his sand iron wings, immediately noticed Han's change. Dark red chakra surged over Han's body as he entered a half-tailed beast transformation. Cloaked in a dark red-tailed beast coat, 5 dark red tails unfurled behind him, and the terrifying aura he emitted swept across the entire battlefield. Everyone's attention was instantly drawn to Han's transformation. Even among the Iwagakure shinobi, many were seeing one of their Jinchuriki enter a half-tailed beast form for the first time. The overwhelming chakra stunned them to the core. Pakura, who was exchanging blows with Rashi, also sensed it immediately. So this is the power of a tailed beast? What an evil and overwhelming chakra. It was her first time truly witnessing a half-tailed beast transformation. If not for the fact that her power had already risen several levels and that she had mastered Sage Mode energy, she wouldn't have had any confidence to even stand against it. Compared to everyone else's shock, Michikawa, facing Han, was much calmer. He had already seen this form once before, that of the late Eight-Tails Jinchuriki from Kumogakure during the last Shinobi World War. But what happened next even startled him. A deep purple chakra ball, about the size of a fist, began forming in front of the half-transformed Five-Tails Jinchuriki. And then it fired. Tailed Beast Bomb. Boom! Chapter 169, Pakura vs. Han. The entire battlefield was left speechless, especially the Iwagakure shinobi. As the deep purple-tailed beast bomb shot toward Michikawa in the sky, the massive explosion that followed filled the heavens with smoke and flames. The violent shockwave whipped up clouds of sand and stone, blasting outward in every direction. The Iwagakure shinobi shielded themselves with their arms. When the explosion finally subsided and the smoke dispersed, the shinobi, cold sweat pouring down their backs, shouted in disbelief. Is this the power of the tailed beasts? Amazing, truly amazing. That Sunagakure shinobi must be dead. They cheered as their strong Jinchuriki once again came victorious. However, their joy lasted less than a second before someone trembled and spoke. No, he's still alive. As the words fell, the last bit of smoke in the sky cleared, revealing Michikawa's figure once again. A thick iron wall about a meter wide stood before him, molten iron slowly dripping from it. How is this possible? The astonishment wasn't limited to the two Iwagakure Jinchuriki, even Madara Uchiha in the distance was surprised. He knew well the power of a tailed beast bomb. Even though a tailed beast bomb launched during a half-transformed state was much weaker, it was still easy enough to destroy a mountain. This was precisely why Jinchuriki were considered living weapons that symbolized a nation's military strength. Yet now, a powerful tailed beast bomb had been stopped by a mere layer of sand iron. Of course, Madara himself could easily block a tailed beast bomb. His old friend, Hashirama, could do so as well. But how did this Sunagakure shinobi manage? Madara, who had originally dismissed this as mere children's play, immediately grew interested. Seeing his tailed beast bomb blocked, the half-transformed Five-Tails Jinchuriki's face revealed confusion, but it didn't stop him from launching another attack. Dark purple chakra once again gathered at Han's mouth. Facing such a lethal move, Michikawa remained perfectly calm, forming hand seals with both hands. This time, however, he wasn't just manipulating chakra, he was also drawing upon the sage energy stored within his body. Sage Art, Magnet Release, Iron Sand Shield. In an instant, countless grains of iron sand infused with chakra and sage energy surged around Michikawa, merging with the existing iron sand to form an enormous wall over 10 meters thick. At the same time, the Five-Tails Jinchuriki launched another tailed beast bomb. This time, everyone on the battlefield could finally see clearly how the iron sand defended against such devastating force. The moment the tailed beast bomb touched the iron sand shield, the fist-sized ball seemed to pierce through the surface easily, merging into it. At first glance, it looked like the shield had failed to block it. But then, the iron sand shield rapidly morphed from a cube into a sphere, completely enclosing the tailed beast bomb inside. Everyone watched in stunned silence as the surface of the iron sand sphere writhed irregularly as if something inside was desperately trying to explode. Eventually, all movement stopped, and searing molten iron began to slowly drip from the sphere. Every Iwagakure shinobi, even the two Jinchuriki, were utterly dumbfounded. None of them had expected that the Jinchuriki's ultimate move, the tailed beast bomb, would be neutralized so easily. But even now, they couldn't fully grasp what had happened. Only Madara Uchiha, watching from afar, observed everything clearly through his Sharingan. The moment the tailed beast bomb touched the iron sand shield, he saw that the peculiar iron sand absorbed the chakra. At the same time, the absorbed chakra was transformed into more iron sand, replenishing the parts melted by the tailed beast bomb and further reinforcing the shield's defense. This familiar scene reminded Madara of his old friend, Hashirama Senju's wood release. What made Hashirama's wood release so troublesome was precisely its ability to absorb the enemy's chakra, turning the opponent's power into a source of strength for the wood release. Borrowing power to counter power was an infuriating technique. Even chakra monsters like the Ninetales could be drained in an instant. Of course, Madara could also tell that the iron sand's chakra absorption wasn't nearly as overwhelming as Hashirama's would release. At best, it had absorbed about a third of the tailed beast bomb's chakra. But that was already enough. With a third of the chakra drained and with the spherical structure evenly distributing the explosion's force, it perfectly withstood the impact. Interesting. Looks like Sunagakure has raised a rather impressive brat, Madara praised without reservation. Meanwhile, the expressions of the Iwagakure shinobi grew even gloomier. A Sunagakure shinobi had so easily blocked a tailed beast bomb launched by a half-transformed Jinchuriki. Han, the Five-Tails Jinchuriki, also wore an ugly expression at this point. Firing 2 consecutive tailed beast bombs was already a considerable burden for him in his half-transformed state. It wasn't a matter of the tailed beast's chakra being insufficient. Rather, it was because the amount of tailed beast chakra he could control in this state was limited. If he continued recklessly, he would risk losing control of the chakra and entering a berserk state. Han's current ability to use the Five Tails power wasn't because he had reached a true understanding with the tailed beast. He could merely borrow some of its strength. If he wanted to borrow more chakra, he would have to enter full tailed beast mode. But now, was it really the time to do that? After all, Sunagakure's main force, the Kazekage, hadn't even entered the fray yet. Nearby, Rashi, the Four-Tails Jinchuriki, also sensed the situation growing dire. He frowned and looked at Pakura coldly. So that's it. This is where Sunagakure's confidence comes from? Daring to face us with just 3 people? Yakura furrowed her brows, but then smirked, as fireballs floated around her once more. What's wrong? Iwagakure's Four-Tails Jinchuriki, are you thinking of surrendering? Despite Pakura's confident words, she was actually feeling a bit of a headache. She had realized that while the sage energy she had mastered gave her scorch release excellent chakra absorption and enhanced defensive capabilities, it was still awkward against something as overwhelmingly destructive as the tailed beast bomb. It wasn't like she could just tank a tailed beast bomb with her body. What now? It was obviously impossible for her to master a whole new defensive secret technique on the spot. Suddenly, Pakura thought of something. That tailed beast bomb seemed somewhat familiar. No, this was clearly her first time seeing such a move. But why did it feel so familiar? In a flash, Pakura remembered she had indeed seen a jutsu that resembled the tailed beast bomb before. It was the Rasengan, used by a Konoha shinobi, Minato Namikaze. If she remembered correctly, Rasa could also use that technique. He had even once used it to save her life. If she could master that jutsu too, then she could counter the tailed beast bomb with her own similar technique, using offense as defense. Thinking of this, Pakura couldn't help but show a faint, almost mischievous smile. As for whether Rasa would teach her, she didn't worry about it at all. However, she didn't realize that her wicked little smile, when seen by Rashi on the other side, completely infuriated him. Sunagakure shinobi! Don't underestimate a Jinchuriki! Rashi roared. Let me show you one truth, only a tailed beast can stand against another tailed beast. Boom! Dark red chakra erupted around Rashi's body. But this time, he didn't stop at half transformation, he directly transformed into a giant red ape, for enormous tails thrashing as he roared into the sky. Chapter 170, Pakura vs. Rashi. This really does bring back memories. Madara Uchiha muttered from the sidelines, a trace of nostalgia flickering in his Sharingan. More than 40 years ago, after Konohadakura was founded, his friend Hashirama proposed distributing the tailed beasts among the 5 great nations to maintain peace. Aside from the one tail already in Tsunagekire's possession, all the other tailed beasts had been captured by the 2 of them, and the 4 tails had been Madara's personal catch. Now, watching the battlefield where a mountain-sized beast had suddenly appeared, even though the Iwagakure shinobi knew it was their own village's tailed beast, the first sight of it still filled them with terror. Their bodies trembled uncontrollably. Fortunately, a familiar voice rumbled from the massive red ape at that moment. All Iwagakure shinobi, fall back 3 miles. Hearing the command, under the lead of the village's jonin, the Iwagakure shinobi immediately began to retreat. Pakura made no move to stop them. There was no need to. Even the jonin who had been struggling against the tanuki monsters knew that with Rashi now in full-tailed beast form, they had no place in this fight. They quickly broke off and retreated as well. As for Han, the 5 tails Jinchuriki, he deactivated his tailed beast mode. He needed to conserve his chakra in case of emergencies. After all, Tsunagekire's Kazekage had yet to make a move. Once the Iwagakure shinobi had retreated to a safe distance, Rashi, now fully transformed into Son Goku the 4 tails, glared down at the tiny Pakura and roared. Tsunagekire shinobi! Let me show you the true power of a tailed beast. What an exaggerated size! Pakura muttered, this being her first time seeing a tailed beast in its complete form. She couldn't deny the overwhelming pressure it exuded. But it was exactly that kind of challenge that made this interesting. Besides, she had Rasa standing behind her. Thinking of this, she swiftly formed hand signs. Summoning technique. A burst of white smoke erupted, and Pakura's figure soared into the air. Beneath her feet, a summoning beast appeared, a giant creature with a yellow body, resembling a cross between a lion and an elephant. In the distance, Madara's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the beast. If I'm not mistaken, that's the Shimura clan's summoning beast, Dream Taper, Baku. How did it end up in Tsunagekire's hands? White Zetsu's voice echoed beside him. Madara-sama, I reported this to you before. Last time, Danzo tried to ambush the Kazekage and not only lost his arm and Sharingan, but even his summoning beast was taken. Madara snorted in disdain. Konoha really is getting more and more weak. Unfortunately, even Madara was speaking too soon. What happened next left him utterly dumbfounded. The newly summoned Dream Taper had just prepared to let out a proud roar to express its excitement at being called by its new master, only to spot Son Goku before it. The roar got stuck in its throat. It stared in shock at Pakura, its expression practically screaming, Is that our enemy? Pakura, of course, understood that sending Dream Taper to fight a fully transformed 4 tails was basically sending it to its death. Still, its utterly pitiful display embarrassed her as she spoke up. Just help me distract him. Leave the tailed beast to me. Pakura's voice rang out confidently as she clasped her hands together and formed the seal of the rooster. 8 gates release, open. Open gate, rest gate, life gate, wound gate, and limit gate. With a fierce burst, Pakura opened 5 gates in a row. Boom! In an instant, chakra exploded from her body like a torrent, overwhelming the battlefield. The immense aura she unleashed sent shockwaves through the area, making everyone realize that the seemingly frail figure of Pakura was now emitting chakra no weaker than that of a tailed beast. WH. What is this? The Iwagakure shinobi looked on in horror, their faces full of disbelief. The strength of Tsunagekire's ninja was far beyond anything they had anticipated. Far in the distance, Madara Uchiha's expression turned cold as he spoke in a frigid tone. This brat, Danzo, really has given the enemy plenty of gifts. It didn't take much to figure out that the Eight Gates, a forbidden technique of Konohagakure, had somehow found its way into the hands of Sunigakure, and it was clearly tied to Danzo. In the center of the battlefield, Pakura, her body surging with visible chakra, stood atop the dream taper, her movements still unrelenting. Despite this overwhelming display, she knew it wasn't enough to defeat the tailed beast just yet. But she still had one final trump card left to play. This technique she had developed over the past year was based on her mastery of the Scorch Release Chakra mode. It combined all the strength she had gained from Rasa over the past year. Sage Arts, Scorch Release Chakra, Phoenix Mode. Instantly, a pair of massive wings, reminiscent of a peacock's tail feathers, ignited in flames behind her. The flames engulfed Pakura, transforming her into a giant, fiery phoenix. With claws burning with intense fire, the phoenix launched toward the Four Tails. The breathtaking, divine sight left everyone on the battlefield speechless. That's one flashy technique. Indeed, when it came to developing jutsu, Pakura proved herself to be a true genius. This technique wasn't just a blend of the Eight Gates, Senjutsu Energy, and Scorch Release, it also incorporated a unique method from Hashigakure, Peacock Mystical Arts. Rasa himself had nearly forgotten about this technique, a force he'd once used during his time in the alternate world. Boom! Rashi, the Four Tails Jinchuriki, looked on with shock as the massive fire phoenix barreled toward him. But he still held confidence in his tailed beast's power. Slamming his hands into the ground, he summoned his own countermeasure. Melting Release, Mount Huagua. In an instant, the earth beneath the Four Tails turned into molten lava. The eruption of magma, towering dozens of meters high, surged toward the phoenix to block its fiery advance. But the phoenix seemed utterly undeterred. It passed through the spewing magma as if it was nothing and continued its path straight toward the Four Tails, its burning claws reaching out. Though Rashi had expected that his melting release might not be enough to stop the phoenix, seeing it completely disregard his defense left him frustrated. But he still trusted in the defensive power of his tailed beast's body. With that thought, he reached out, intending to grab the incoming phoenix's claws. However, what he didn't anticipate was the searing pain that shot through his hands the moment he made contact with the blazing claws. Looking down, he saw burn marks appearing on the Four Tails' hands. How is this possible? Rashi couldn't comprehend what was happening. At that moment, a voice echoed in his mind. Idiot, don't try to brute force it. Her flames are different. There's a special kind of energy inside them that can hurt me. What? Rashi was stunned to hear the Four Tails speak to him directly, but he trusted the beast's words. Ignoring the pain, he swiftly threw the phoenix away. As for Pakura, the phoenix she controlled spun in the air for a moment before it flared its wings, and countless fireballs appeared beneath its burning feathers. These fireballs hurtled toward the Four Tails. Rashi, feeling the pain in his hands, could only dodge as quickly as he could. Chapter 171, Rasa Takes Action. How interesting. To think it can actually harm a tailed beast's body, is this the special power of Sunigakure? Not far from the battlefield, Madara Uchiha's tone grew noticeably serious. Now that he had already acquired the power of Outer Path of Rinnegan, he fully understood what tailed beasts were. They were lifeforms created by the Sage of Six Paths through Yin-Yang Release, so in theory, the only powers that could harm or control them were Yin-Yang Release and pure Taijutsu. But now, this small shinobi village, Sunigakure, had demonstrated a power that could harm a tailed beast. This suggested that even the Yin-Yang Release he possessed might not be as invincible as he once believed. As he continued to watch the battlefield, he asked in a low voice, Have you gathered any intel on what this power actually is? White Zetsu's voice sounded a little flustered. Madara-sama, according to your orders, we didn't dare risk investigating that mysterious oasis in Sunigakure. After all, there's a Uzumaki survivor there, and they can sense us. As for those Iwagakure guys, we lured them there, but unfortunately, they were completely useless. They found nothing and got sealed up instead. Fearing the risk of exposure, we didn't retrieve the spores either. Madara said nothing. He understood. White Zetsu's group was indeed good at gathering intel, but their intelligence overall was lacking. It seemed that for the sake of his future plans, he needed to create another perfect agent that could carry out his will without fail. Let's call it Black Zetsu. As expected from a battle between the strongest forces of each side. The clash between Pakura in Phoenix mode and Rashi in his full-tailed beast form was nothing short of earth-shattering. Even though the Iwagakure shinobi had already retreated 3 miles, the shockwaves and intense heat from the battle still forced them to fall back another 5 miles. At this point, there was nothing they could do to intervene. In a battle with this level of destructive power, even a Jonin would be nothing but a hapless target. No one was surprised that a tailed beast could wield such devastating power. But why did this Sunagakure Kunoichi possess the strength to match? What made the Iwagakure shinobi even more uneasy was that far away, the Kazekage still hadn't made any move at all. If just one Sunagakure shinobi was this strong, how terrifying must their Kazekage be? Thinking of this, the Iwagakure shinobi suddenly understood. Why did the 3 Sunagakure shinobi dare to face 6,000 of their own and even challenge 2 Jinchuriki? It was because they truly had the strength to do so. At the center of the battlefield, Rashi was finally experiencing the same suffering that Han had endured. Faced with the airborne Pakura, he could only endure her relentless attacks. Furthermore, due to his massive size, he was nothing more than a walking target. Damn slippery thing, so annoying. At this point, Rashi could no longer hold back. He suddenly tilted his head upward, gathering chakra rapidly in his mouth. As a fully transformed tailed beast, Rashi's tailed beast bomb at this moment was far larger than Han's earlier one. It wasn't just a little bigger, it had grown from the size of a fist to something nearly the size of half a basketball court. Seeing this, Pakura, already transformed into a phoenix high in the sky, sensed the overwhelming chakra packed into the tailed beast bomb and broke into a cold sweat. Though unwilling, she understood that with her current power, she could not block this fully powered tailed beast bomb. Fortunately, just then, Rasa's voice sounded behind her. "Half an hour is up. Pakura, Michikawa, you two can fall back. Leave the rest to me." Of course, Rasa's movements didn't escape the watchful eyes of the Iwagakure shinobi and Madara Uchiha. "Oh, he's finally making his move? Let's see what kind of power this kid holds," Madara murmured. Without any hesitation, Pakura and Michikawa deactivated their techniques, reverting to their normal appearances, and retreated to the golden cloud of sand Rasa had floated over on. Rashi, who was preparing the tailed beast bomb, felt a twinge of unease upon seeing this, but his confidence in the tailed beast's power made him launch the massive bomb at Rasa without a second thought. Facing the massive, deep purple tailed beast bomb hurtling toward them, Rasa remained calm, bringing his hands together. Sage Art, Desert Slave Rebellion. Just as the tailed beast bomb was about to strike the 3 of them, 2 enormous arms of sand burst from the ground, grabbing the tailed beast bomb midair. What? It wasn't just the Iwagakure shinobi who were stunned, even Rashi, the very master of this tailed beast bomb, was frozen with shock. A tailed beast bomb capable of destroying an entire village had been caught so easily? Even Madara, watching from afar, was a little surprised. Of course, he himself could easily block a tailed beast bomb with Susanu's defense. And his old friend Hashirama could even catch one barehanded and play with it like a ball. But this shinobi from Sunagakure. As everyone was still reeling from the shock, the tailed beast bomb, struggling fiercely in the grip of the sand arms, began to shrink, smaller and smaller, until eventually it dissipated into a wisp of green smoke. The Iwagakure shinobi stared at the scene, horrified, instinctively retreating further back. "You've got to be kidding. That terrifying attack was neutralized so easily. So this is Sunagakure's Kazekage? He's on a completely different level from those other Sunagakure shinobi." Not long ago, Michikawa had also managed to block a tailed beast bomb, but definitely not as effortlessly as this. Gulp! The Iwagakure shinobi all unconsciously swallowed hard. Behind Rasa, Pakura and Michikawa also revealed faint, hard-to-detect expressions of shock. Though they had long known Rasa was frighteningly powerful with sage energy, they hadn't truly grasped just how strong he was. Rasa seldom showed his full power. But now they clearly understood, Rasa was no longer on the same level as them. Rasa, meanwhile, paid no mind to the two behind him. After destroying the tailed beast's bomb, Rasa slowly floated on his golden cloud of sand until he was face to face with the still stunned Four Tails, Son Goku. Nearby, Han, the Jinchuriki of the Five Tails, also tensed up and transformed into his complete tailed beast form, a gigantic white creature resembling a fusion of a dolphin and a goat, towering above everyone. At this moment, two mountain-sized tailed beasts stood between the Iwagakure shinobi and their enemies. Standing before them, representing Sunigakure, were Kazekage Rasa, Pakura of Scorch Release, and Michikawa of Magnet Release. Rasa looked at the two-tailed beasts, now on full alert, and spoke slowly. Personally, I have no interest in slaughter. But as Kazekage, for the sake of my village, I must eliminate Iwagakure's forces here. However, if the Jinchuriki of the Four Tails and Five Tails choose to surrender now, I will spare the lives of the Iwagakure shinobi. Don't joke with us. Before Rasa's words had fully faded, Rashi's voice roared out from within the Four Tails' body. Iwagakure shinobi may fall in battle, but we never surrender. Though not surprised by the answer, Rasa sighed. I see. Then, I can only apologize. At that moment, standing behind Rasa, Pakura, and Michikawa were both wide-eyed in shock. They could feel the overwhelming sage energy radiating from Rasa, vast as a mountain. Sage Art, Magnet Release, Birth of the Sand Tree World. Chapter 172, The Power of the Demon. Boom! What was that sound? As Rasa executed his jutsu, a rumbling sound echoed through the earth. Everyone felt the ground beneath their feet shaking. They still hadn't understood what kind of technique this was. The earth suddenly cracked open, with spiderweb-like fissures spreading under the feet of the Iwagakure ninja. This caused them to lose their balance and feel a sense of unease in their hearts. Some of the Iwagakure ninjas were already considering retreating. Be careful. Rashi, who had transformed into the Four Tails Son Goku, immediately shouted to the ninja behind him while warily scanning his surroundings. Facing the mysterious Kazekage, Rashi could not afford to let his guard down for a moment. He wanted to sense what was happening beneath his feet, but unfortunately, he could feel nothing. Boom! 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 At that moment, with the deafening sound of explosions, countless grains of sand erupted from the cracks. The entire battlefield was soon engulfed in a cloud of yellow sand. The Iwagakure ninja, witnessing the world around them turn gray-yellow, were startled. They quickly drew their kunai and began to defend themselves. However, this yellow sand appeared to have no unusual properties other than obscuring their vision, limiting their sight to just a few meters and making it somewhat difficult to breathe. Like Rashi, those at the front of the battlefield found it peculiar. He scanned his surroundings, and aside from the white Five Tails beside him, he couldn't see the ninja behind him. Fortunately, his sensory abilities remained effective, but he didn't sense anything out of the ordinary. Yet, this was the strangest part. He couldn't believe that the mysterious Kazekage's technique would be so light and casual. Rashi's confusion was shared by Pakura and Michikawa, who stood behind Rasa. They both looked at Rasa with questioning gazes. Rasa, however, appeared calm and unconcerned. Don't worry. I told you. I'm not interested in slaughter, so I used a gentler technique. A gentler technique. The two were taken aback. Meanwhile, far away on the battlefield, Madara Uchiha, who was watching everything, noticed it through his Sharingan. What technique is this? With the inside of the Sharingan, he clearly saw. Amidst the endless yellow sand, the grains of sand entered the bodies of the Iwagakure ninja through their breath or adhered to their skin, beginning to absorb their chakra. The Iwagakure ninja could not sense it in the short term because the effect was like a slow-acting poison. But Madara Uchiha didn't dare to underestimate it, as he also noticed that the rate at which their chakra was being absorbed was accelerating. Rasa's strange technique had plunged the entire battlefield into an eerie silence. These ninjas naturally felt that something was wrong, but the yellow sand was so vast, and the visibility was so poor that they couldn't distinguish direction or figure out where to flee. Suddenly, a scream echoed across the battlefield. "Ah, help! Help me!" Rashi and Han were both startled. The other Iwabikure ninjas were also alarmed. They tried to see what was happening. But the yellow sand obscured their vision, preventing them from making out anything clearly. They couldn't see anything at all. At that moment, more and more screams began to echo. "Ah! What is this? I can't move. My body. My chakra." Instantly, the battlefield was filled with screams, one after another, resembling a hellish scene that chilled the hearts of those still alive. What terrified Rashi and Han even more was that with each scream, the chakra of the Iwabikure ninja disappeared in their senses. "We can't go on like this. Han, blow these sands away." "Got it!" Han, transformed into the Five Tails, immediately reared up like a horse, raising his front limbs high and stomping down on the ground. Boom! In an instant, boiling steam erupted from the Five Tails' feet, blasting outward. Han clearly intended to use the force of the steam to blow away the sand, but what happened next left him stunned. The yellow sand around him seemed to swallow the white steam that erupted from his feet, vanishing without a trace. How is that possible? At that moment, Rashi heard the voice of the Four Tails Son Goku in his mind once again. "Idiot! Can't you see? These sands are absorbing chakra." "What?" After the Four Tails reminder, Rashi finally realized. His chakra was also being absorbed. However, compared to the massive body of the tailed beast, these sands were minuscule. It felt like the bite of a mosquito sucking blood. Now that he understood what these sands were, Rashi finally had a plan. Countless amounts of chakra began to gather at the Four Tails' mouth. Soon, a deep purple-tailed beast ball appeared, and the Four Tails raised its head high, firing it directly into the sky. The deep purple-tailed beast ball shot like a meteor into the sky, and then... boom! A massive mushroom cloud erupted in the sky, and the shockwave from the explosion swept outward in all directions. Now, even if Rasa's sand was absorbing chakra at a rapid rate, it couldn't compare to the shockwave generated by the explosion of the tailed beast ball. In an instant, the yellow sand was blown away completely. However, after the sand was cleared, the scene at the Iwabikure ninja's position made both Rashi and Han's pupils shrink. On the desolate, barren land, countless human-shaped sand sculptures, resembling cacti, had sprouted at some point. If one looked closely, they could see the twisted human faces trapped within the sand-covered sculptures. The surviving Iwabikure ninja, upon seeing this terrifying sight, had their pupils contract in fear, their bodies trembling from dread. Some even. What kind of power is this? With just one strike, Iwabikure had lost at least a tenth of their fighting strength. Although they were mostly low-ranking and middle-ranking ninjas, this hellish scene had left a psychological scar on them that could never be erased. They all looked at Rasa's figure in the sky with fear in their eyes, all having the same thought. Is this a demon? But then, Rasa's next words caused their emotions to spiral like a roller coaster, lifting their spirits, which had just plummeted, back up again. Don't worry. They are just controlled by my sand. If treated properly, their lives won't be in danger. In the eyes of all the Iwabikure ninja, and even those of Pakura and Michikawa behind Rasa, filled with disbelief, Rasa calmly said, I told you, I am not here because I enjoy killing. I am here because, as the Kazekage of Sunigakure, I must be here due to this war. So now, you still have a chance. The Jinchuriki of the Four Tails and Five Tails, if you choose to surrender and the Iwabikure ninja chooses to retreat, this war will end here. Rasa said calmly, but his next words send shivers down to everyone's spine. If not, then I will create an actual hell for you and your generations to plunder and fear. Chapter 173, God. Rasa was not someone who liked to waste words. Like before he came to this world, he hated the constant chatter in the comics. However, only after being in this world and sitting in the position of Kazekage did Rasa realize that verbal warfare had its value. Because ruling through only violence and fear is an incredibly difficult task. You have too many enemies to face. Perhaps you might think that with great power, you wouldn't have to fear anyone and could just kill whoever disobeys. It's like saying, if you can't solve the problem, then solve the one causing it. But here's the issue, eliminating the problem's source doesn't mean the problem will vanish. It will only appear in another form. This was the reason why Rasa showed mercy to the Iwagakure ninja. After gaining this new power, Rasa already had a clear path for the future. That path was the unification of the shinobi world. It wasn't that Rasa was overly obsessed with power. His only goal in this was to prepare for potential enemies that might appear in the future, such as the Otsutsuki clan. Therefore, he couldn't kill these Iwagakure ninjas. This might seem like a double standard. Last time, in the Land of Rivers, Rasa didn't show any mercy to the Konoha ninja. That's right. Rasa wasn't going to deny it, he had a double standard. But he also wanted to defend himself. That's because Rasa knew he might eventually conquer Iwagakure, Kimogakure, or even Kirigakure, but Konoha was the least likely to be conquered because that was the village where the world's protagonists lived. Turning the Hokage into the Kazekage was not impossible, but it was obviously more complicated than with the other three villages. So, it was better for him to temporarily abandon Konoha, which had the smallest chance, and unite the other villages that were easier to unite. In addition to this, maintaining a balance of military power was also crucial. Of course, this wasn't easy. Just like now, after hearing Rasa's words, both Rashi and Han immediately shouted angrily. This is absolutely impossible, Kazekage. Although I'm grateful for your mercy on our village's ninja, it's still the same as I said, there are only dead Iwagakure ninja, no surrendering Iwagakure ninja. However, it wasn't entirely in vain. At least now, Rashi's reaction wasn't as intense as before. Now, it was time for something very important. That was true verbal warfare. True verbal warfare wasn't about trying to convince someone with quick words from the start, it was about first defeating them and then using both the carrot and the stick to convince them. Is that so? Then, what a pity. I won't show mercy anymore. With those words, Rasa clasped his hands together, and upon seeing this, Rashi and Han's expressions hardened. Sage Art, Magnet Release, Sand Iron Domain. Boom! In an instant, the entire ground began to crack, and sand iron surged from the earth like a tsunami, blocking out the sun. It transformed into sharp, diamond-shaped tendrils, heading straight for the two-tailed beasts in the distance. The Four Tails and Five Tails didn't hesitate for a moment. At that moment, they both used their most powerful technique, the Tailed Beast Ball. Two massive purple chakra orbs, roughly the size of half a basketball court, sped toward the incoming sand iron. Boom! A violent explosion immediately caused the heavens and earth to tremble, as if the very fabric of the world was being torn apart. The surrounding Iwagakure ninja, hit by this intense shockwave, could no longer maintain their footing. Seeing this, the village's jonins immediately issued orders. Everyone, retreat with your sand-turned comrades. Hi! Far in the distance, feeling the terrifying hot wind approaching, White Zetsu also spoke up. Madara-sama, should we retreat? If we stay here, we'll be caught in the aftermath of the battle. But the said boss only rubbed his chin in amusement. Interesting. At that moment, the eyes of Madara Uchiha, reflecting the light of his Sharingan, showed signs of interest. Although I don't want to admit it, this little brat's power is really starting to get the better of me in this worn-out body. It looks like the plan needs to change. Let's go. Instantly, his body melded into the earth and disappeared. On the battlefield, Rasa and the two-tailed beasts were finally fully engaged in combat. Unlike the earlier battle with Pakura, Michikawa, Rashi, and Han, which, although extraordinary, was still within human limits, this battle between Rasa and the tailed beasts had surpassed human capabilities. Boom! 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 On the barren desert, each tailed beast ball, powerful enough to destroy a mountain or a village, erupted with immense destructive force, flashing and lighting up the sky. In contrast, the seemingly endless black sand iron spread like an ocean, coloring the land a deep, inky black, transforming the battlefield into a vast sea of darkness. Even the powerful tailed beast balls, upon encountering this sea of black sand iron, were devoured like ships sinking into the ocean, quickly vanishing without a trace. The Iwagakure ninja, who had already retreated to a safe distance, could only think of one word upon seeing this scene. God! This was the power of a god. Before such divine power, even the tailed beast's Jinchuriki began to falter. Rashi and Han were, after all, imperfect Jinchuriki. Even if they were perfect Jinchuriki, facing sand iron that could absorb their chakra and seemed endless, they too gradually started to weaken. Almost done! Sensing that the chakra in the two Jinchuriki was nearly exhausted, Rasa knew it was time to use his sealing technique. Sage Art, Magnet Release Thorn Seal. Violet floral patterns, representing the sealing of the Shikaku, appeared on the sand iron. The iron tendrils climbed up the massive tailed beasts, and Rashi and Han instantly sensed something was wrong. But it was already too late. Their huge forms became moving targets. Thorny iron trees began growing on their bodies, restricting the tailed beasts' movements and suppressing their chakra. Rashi and Han suddenly felt the connection between themselves and their tailed beasts severed. Did we fail? Feeling his consciousness fade, Rashi sighed inwardly. This was certainly something they had not anticipated before coming. Just like how they never expected this young Kazekage to be so powerful. It seemed that Inoki's plan had failed. Iwagakure could no longer prevent Sunegakure's rise. Once the news of this battle spread, no village would dare to challenge Sunegakure easily again. However, that no longer concerned him. The battle concluded, and the sealed bodies of Rashi and Han were delivered to Rasa by the sand iron. He wasted no time, looking toward the trembling Iwagakure ninja in the distance. Go tell your Otsutsuki, Inoki, I've taken the 4 tails and 5 tails. If he wants them back, he should come to Sunegakure with sincerity. With those words, Rasa flew into the air, taking Jinchuriki, Pakura, and Michikawa. Watching Rasa leave, the Iwagakure ninja stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to do. After a long moment, a Jonin stepped forward. This is no longer a battle we can intervene in. Let's set up camp here, report everything that happened to Otsutsuki-sama, and wait for his decision. Chapter 174, Aftermath. Land of Fire, Konohagakure. Hokage's office. The moment news reached Konohagakure that the war between Sunegakure, Kumogakure, and Iwagakure was on the brink of exploding, the current pillar of Konoha, Minato Namikaze, could no longer stay in Mount Myaboku for training. At this moment, the Hokage office was filled with tension. All the high-ranking officials of the village had gathered. The atmosphere was heavy as everyone awaited updates from the village's intelligence officers regarding the battlefield. The outcome of this war would determine Konoha's position in the conflict. Everyone in Konoha hoped that this war between Sunegakure, Iwagakure, and Kumogakure would drag the 3 villages deeply into the quagmire of war, allowing Konoha to finally rest easy. And they wouldn't have to wait long. In just a day or two, news from the front lines would surely arrive. Sitting beside Minato, Jiraiya, seemingly more relaxed, casually asked, "How's it going? Have you returned home?" Was Kushina angry? Minato gave a somewhat awkward smile at Jiraiya's question. Although he had written letters to Kushina through the frogs while in Mount Myaboku, it was impossible for her not to feel resentment after being separated for so long. Just then, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from outside, silencing the entire office. The door to the Hokage office opened, and Shikaku Nara, the current strategist of the Hokage, appeared. However, in that moment, the stern expression on Shikaku's face immediately made everyone feel that something was wrong. "What's the matter, Shikaku?" Shikaku glanced around the office before steeling himself and walking up to Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Hokage, pulling out a scroll and speaking. "Hokage-sama, this is the intelligence we just received from Iwagakure. Please take a look. Hiruzen's face grew serious as he took the scroll, giving Shikaku a brief glance before slowly unrolling it. Upon reading it, his body shook, and he shouted in disbelief. How is this possible? Has the intelligence been confirmed? Hiruzen's outburst immediately raised alarms among everyone in the office. Shikaku nodded gravely. We've confirmed it, Hokage-sama. There's no mistake. After all, this concerns the Jinchuriki. Iwagakure wouldn't make a joke out of this. Hiruzen's grip tightened on the scroll as the tension in the room escalated. Sensing the rising unease, Minato could no longer contain his curiosity and asked Shikaku. Shikaku, what's going on? Shikaku glanced at the Hokage, waiting for a moment before he slowly replied. We've just received word that Rasa, the Kazekage of Sunigakure, along with the Jutsu Masters Pakura and Michikawa, appeared in the Land of Birds. With overwhelming force, they defeated Iwagakure's ninja and captured 2 of Iwagakure's Jinchuriki, the Four Tails, Rashi, and the Five Tails, Han. What? At that moment, everyone in the Hokage's office had their expressions changed drastically. Danzo's reaction was the most intense, immediately shouting. Stop spouting nonsense, Shikaku. Sunigakure's forces were in the Land of Rivers, weren't they? Yeah. This was something everyone had confirmed. At this moment, only Minato understood what was happening and spoke in a low, grave tone. Shikaku, are you saying that Sunigakure, with just 3 people, stopped Iwagakure's 6,000-strong ninja force and captured 2 Jinchuriki? Shikaku glanced at the shocked faces of everyone in the room, his pupils narrowing slightly, before reluctantly nodding. Yes, according to the intelligence from Iwagakure, the Kazekage of Sunigakure, Rasa, along with the Scorch Release user Pakura and Magnet Release user Michikawa, demonstrated extraordinary power in this battle. Even the tailed beast balls of the Jinchuriki were easily neutralized. Especially Rasa, who, in the final battle, fought 2 Jinchuriki simultaneously and captured them with overwhelming force. At that moment, everyone in the Hokage office shuddered, their faces filled with disbelief. You're kidding! Those are Jinchuriki we're talking about. Fighting 2 at once, with overwhelming strength? How is that even possible? Only the first Hokage could do something like this, right? Everyone spoke in shocked disbelief, their fear palpable in their words. At this point, the only ones who managed to stay calm were Minato, Jiraiya, and Orochimaru. Interesting. Orochimaru, who knew some secrets, excitedly licked his lips. Jiraiya furrowed his brows in thought. Minato's gaze momentarily blanked, but he quickly regained his composure, a hint of respect in his tone as he spoke. I see now. So, this is the true plan of the Kazekage. With just 3 people, they changed the course of the war. If that's the case, with the tailed beasts in hand, and considering the nature of the Tsuchikage, Iwagakure probably won't be attacking Konoha anymore. This breaks up the alliance between Iwagakure and Kumogakure. From now on, Sunigakure only has to face Kumogakure. No, after this battle, with the Kazekage's demonstrated ability to suppress 2 tailed beasts, even Kumogakure will think twice before acting rashly. Once again, the Hokage office fell into silence. Everyone could feel the uncertainty about the future of the ninja world. Land of Rain. Under the steady patter of rain. As the leaders of the Akatsuki, Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato looked at the intelligence they had just received, they were equally astonished. Not long ago, they had been tasked with intercepting the Iwagakure ninjas who tried to pass through the Land of Rain, as per their agreement with Sunigakure. However, Yahiko had only ordered the Akatsuki members to secretly obstruct the Iwagakure ninjas without direct confrontation. After all, the Akatsuki's numbers and strength were no match for Iwagakure's forces. Fortunately, the Akatsuki was familiar with the geography of the Land of Rain. Even so, Yahiko had still been concerned that the conflict might escalate, potentially leading to the death of their members in this war. However, to their surprise, the Iwagakure ninjas suddenly chose to retreat, without even completing their journey. This baffled Yahiko and the others, as they initially thought it might be some kind of trick by Iwagakure. It wasn't until they received the latest intelligence that everything became clear. As they read the report detailing the overwhelming power displayed by the Kazekage, Rasa, who had captured 2 Jinchuriki, the 3 were stunned. Yahiko recalled his previous encounter with Rasa and the stories Jiraiya-sensei had told them about the first Hokage, Senju Hashirama, who had once ruled the ninja world. Yahiko then had an idea and asked, "Konan, Nagato, have you ever been to Sunagakure?" While the entire ninja world was shocked by the frightening power displayed by Sunagakure's fourth Kazekage, Rasa, the story's protagonist, Rasa himself, returned to Sunagakure. After safely securing the 2-tailed beasts, he went straight to the Ryuchi cave to meet with the White Snake Sage. Chapter 175, New Training. Ryuchi Cave. Inside the dark cave. Following a report from the Taijutsuheim, Rasa once again met with the White Snake Sage. "Kazekage, I'm not sure why you wanted to see me again. Are you ready to accept the terms I proposed earlier? To use your special power to turn the natural energy of our Ryuchi cave into Senjutsu energy?" the White Snake Sage asked. Rasa shook his head but still explained. "Sorry, it's not that I'm refusing. I just believe that any transaction should be made on equal terms of power." The White Snake Sage showed no signs of displeasure but instead asked, "Oh? Are you dissatisfied with your current power, Kazekage? I have seen it myself. Even the 5 tails and 4 tails were easily sealed by you. No. For me, among all the tailed beasts, only the 9 tails power is worth my attention," Rasa replied. After all, the 9 tails could defeat 7 opponents with only half of its power. The White Snake Sage nodded, acknowledging this, and then asked, "So, what is it that you wish to discuss with me?" Rasa didn't hesitate and directly asked, "I want to ask a question. I want to do something, but I don't want any of the 6 Path Sages to detect it. Is there a way?" The White Snake Sage's eyes brightened, immediately understanding what Rasa meant. "You wish to take action against the tailed beasts?" Rasa didn't deny it. "So, does Lord White Snake think it's impossible?" The White Snake Sage finally seemed a little more energetic and responded, "From my standpoint, I have no objection. However, I do not recommend it." "Why?" Rasa asked. "Simple," the White Snake Sage began. "Since Kagaya Otsutsuki became the Jinchuriki of the Ten Tails and passed her chakra through the ninja world via the shinobi religion, she, as the owner of the chakra, can observe any place in this world that contains chakra. In other words, as long as there's no chakra, she won't be able to observe it?" Rasa asked. "That's the theory, but it's very difficult to achieve. Take you, for example, even though you don't have chakra in your body now, Otsutsuki Kagaya can't observe you directly, but she can still observe you through the chakra around you, your family, your subordinates, and even chakra-infused ninja tools. If you plan to take action against the tailed beasts, even if you bring them to a space devoid of chakra, she will still be able to know your movements through the tailed beast's chakra." Rasa's brow furrowed deeply. "Is there really no way?" The White Snake Sage pondered for a moment. "Well, it's not entirely hopeless. Unless your space-time abilities surpass Otsutsuki Kagaya's, allowing you to create a world beyond the reach of chakra." "Is there any way to do that?" Rasa pressed. At that moment, the White Snake Sage gazed intently at him. "Of course, there is a way. Don't forget, I once told you about my abilities." Rasa immediately recalled what the White Snake Sage had said before. Her greatest skill was the ability to create spaces. If it were in the past, Rasa would naturally have hesitated, but after all his time spent with the Ryuchi cave, the other party had shown enough goodwill. If he was too suspicious now, it would indeed seem ungrateful. "I remember. Please teach me, Lord White Snake," Rasa said earnestly. The White Snake Sage nodded and explained. "It's simple. The key lies in the Dragon Transformation secret technique. Our Ryuchi Cave's Dragon Transformation technique can help the practitioner's power evolve, granting them new abilities. There are two ways to acquire this new power. One is through self-evolution, but that evolution is uncertain, and the abilities obtained are unknown. The other way is by receiving guidance. Our Ryochi cave follows the second method. The guiding power comes from the scales passed down by the previous White Snake sages. Rasa nodded, eager to understand. So, what should I do specifically? Just infuse the power of my scales into the dragon transformation technique. This power will take root within your body like a seed, allowing you to grasp the power of space. The White Snake Sage explained. Sunagakure. After returning from the Ryochi cave, Rasa immediately summoned Baki and Anoka. Once they entered, Rasa wasted no time and spoke directly. I need both of you to do something. Baki, who now blindly admired and trusted Rasa, especially after seeing Rasa capture the Four Tails and Five Tails Jinchuriki of Awagakure, was filled with excitement. Anoka asked, "What is it?" Rasa summoned two of the puppets made by Chiyo, specifically the Four Tails and Five Tails puppets, using his summoning technique. Anoka, I need you to use sealing techniques to extract some chakra from these two Jinchuriki and seal it into these puppets. Baki, you'll assist her. Got it! Baki responded eagerly. The two Jinchuriki were left under the supervision of the Umbu after being captured. Although Rasa had dismissed his previous plans to deal with the tailed beasts under the White Snake Sage's advice, this did not mean that Rasa had lost interest in their chakra. At least, he was still interested in the lava release of the Four Tails and the boil release of the Five Tails. Anoka asked curiously, "Can these puppets suppress the tailed beast chakra?" "Don't worry," Rasa assured her. The core of these puppets is made from my Senjutsu chakra, so suppressing tailed beast chakra won't be an issue. But be gentle when extracting the chakra. We can't let anything happen to these two Jinchuriki, or Inoki might really try to kill me. Understood. Baki nodded, though a little disappointed. He knew that the Four Tails and Five Tails could never truly be absorbed by Sunagakure, they were only being used to restrain Awagakure. Alright, get to work, Rasa said. After Baki and Anoka left, Rasa let out a sigh of relief. With the Four Tails and Five Tails under his control, it meant that Sunagakure now held the initiative in the war. Inoki would never dare to make a rash move. He wouldn't allow the Jinchuriki, who had cost Awagakure so many resources to produce, to be lost. Without Inoki, even the strength of Kumo would not be enough to pose a serious threat. With that, Sunagakure could fully withdraw from the turmoil of this war and focus on developing the village. But Rasa also knew not to let his guard down. Even though he had easily sealed the Four Tails and Five Tails in this battle, he knew that even if the tailed beasts were sealed, it was uncertain how much power they could still exert. And even if the tailed beasts were fully released, the One Tail through Seven Tails were no match for the Eight Tails and Nine Tails. Not to mention, the Nine Tails in this case was only half of its full power. So, Rasa knew that he had no reason to become arrogant just yet. Next, he returned home. With Chiyo, Ebizo, and Bunpuku all away on missions, Hana had temporarily returned to the village. For her safety, Rasa asked her to stay with Karura for the time being. During this period, Karura's pregnancy had progressed, and she had started experiencing morning sickness. Hana, who had been a little shy before, became very excited upon hearing about Karura's pregnancy and eagerly took on the responsibility of taking care of her. After making sure his wife was well taken care of, Rasa returned to the Ryochi cave to continue his training. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in part 8. Peace.